Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Hokage Naruto goes to Hogwarts. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by True Sage Naruto, and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. It was a beautiful morning in the village hidden in the leaf. The warming rays of the sun beamed down upon the streets, bathing everything in a soothing ethereal glow. Parents were already out and about buying ingredients for breakfast with smiles on their faces. Doing their best to avoid the young children ran down the street, large smiles splitting their chubby little faces. One would find it hard to believe that anyone could be unhappy on a day that was starting out so perfectly. But if you happened to be traveling down the main road, you'd see a young blonde-haired boy walking down the middle of the street, grumbling with a slight frown on his face. Now, whilst this might not be too big of a surprise to see on the face of a normal preteen, the sight of a frown on this boy's face was immensely rare. As one of the things, this child was known for the perpetual smile that was always on his face, well, almost always. This frowning youth was none other than Naruto Uzumaki, the Hidden Leaf Village's very own prankster king. Stupid bird, waking me up this early in the morning, not even supposed to be out, were just a few of the words that one would hear coming out of the young blonde's mouth. If anyone was willing to listen, that was. One might wonder what could get him so riled up this early in the morning. Well, the answer to that question would be what happened not but 20 minutes ago, at the apartment of the young preteen in question. Naruto couldn't help but to smile in his sleep as he hugged the large pillow closer to himself, a rather large smile splitting his face whilst drool flowed in a steady stream from the corner of his mouth, mutters of the word ramen the only thing breaking up his snoring. Sadly, the happily dreaming boy, peaceful morning was quickly shattered by the sound of his fragile glass window pane shattering. His reaction was instantaneous, as the blonde quickly rolled off his bed and to his feet, his hand having slipped under the bed for a split second in the middle of his roll to grab the kunai that he kept hidden for protection. Now there were a number of things that Naruto expected to see after he rolled to his feet: a brick with the word demon scribbled on it, a poorly aimed kunai or shuriken, old rotten food. All of these things Naruto was somewhat used to seeing come flying at him, but the dazed owl that currently lay upon his floor was most certainly not something that he would have ever expected to see. He watched the dazed bird carefully, not sure whether the bird would attack when it came to or simply leave. Naruto chose to slow back away, hoping to not catch the owl's attention. Unfortunately, since Naruto, like so many young boys, was absolutely horrid at keeping his room clean, and sadly this child had no parents to try and make sure that he did, on his second step backwards Naruto's foot inadvertently crushed one of his discarded instant ramen cups. The rather loud crunching noise managed to rouse the downed bird back into a state of full awareness. The blonde's bright cerulean eyes shot from the crushed cup that was under his foot back to now fully awake bird, in a meeting of blue and yellow. The young blonde watched rather confused as the large bird turned its head, almost in if the boy didn't know any better irritation. Naruto simply stared at the bird, trying to understand not only why it had flown into his rather grimy window, especially since said window was closed, but more importantly, why hadn't it flown back out? The answer to the boy's question came in the form of the large bird sticking its right leg out towards the preteen, accompanied with a soft hoot, seemingly to make sure and catch the child's attention. Naruto, having just noticed the letter wrapped around the owl's leg, carefully shuffled forward at a remarkable slow rate so as not to startle the bird into attacking him, until he could safely reach out and gently untie and pull the letter from the large bird-appraised leg. Quickly jumping away from the now unburdened owl's leg, not really thinking about the fact that moving away so fast could in fact cause the bird to attack him, Naruto carried the unopened letter into his living room, where with very careful movements he opens the envelope. His movements might have seemed completely unnecessary to anyone else, but sadly for the young blonde this wouldn't be the first time that someone had sent him a poisoned letter. Once he had finished carefully checking to make sure that there was no forms of any toxin inside the envelope, the blonde quickly pulled out the letter and began reading, his eyes growing wider as he read each word before finally narrowing as he finished. His anger reaching a new height at the fact that he had been woken up early so that some ass could punk him with some stupid letter about going to a magic school. Yeah, the old man Hokage would be getting an earful about this. And that is where this current morning started, and the reason why. Not only is Naruto angrily marching towards the massive red tower that rested towards the center of the village, but why flying not 10 feet behind and above said blonde was a large gray owl. This sight of course brought about many whispered comment, many of which began with the words demon child. Of course Naruto, having heard comments like that for the better part of his life, had learned to simply tune them out. Almost an hour had passed since his incredibly early awakening, well, early for him at least, when Naruto finally made it into the Hokage Tower and marched right past the secretary that had barely made it out of her chair by the time that Naruto threw open the door and marched in with a rather loud yell of old man, instantly drawing the attention of everyone inside the room, those that were visible and those that currently were not. The room already had 4 visible occupants inside, 3 people standing before the desk, 2 males and 1 female. These 3 would be the Hokage's advisors, Lord Danzo, Lord Hamura, and Lady Koharu. But it was the 4th visible person in the room that Naruto had come to see, the old man that sat behind the desk, with a pipe in his mouth. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and whilst the old Kage smiled at the sight of the young boy as he brought a much-needed interruption from the rather aggravating discussion that he had been having with his 3 advisors, said advisors couldn't help but to glare at the young child. Naruto, noticing their glares, simply and childishly glared right on back. Well, hello Naruto, this is a rather interesting change. Hiruzen commented as not only was the young boy up before 9 on a Saturday morning, but he also had a great grey owl perched rather comfortably on his head, much to the boy's obvious discomfort. I need to talk to you, old man. Naruto all but demanded as his left eyebrow began to twitch. After all, he wanted nothing more than to swat the damned bird off his head, but he was too terrified that it would dig its talons into the top of his skull if he tried to. As much as I'd love to, Naruto, I'm afraid that you came at a very bad time. Hiruzen began before he noticed the letter that Naruto was clutching in his small 11-year-old hands, more specifically the crest that was emblazoned upon the letter in the boy's hand. That symbol, along with the owl resting upon the boy's head, was all it took for Hiruzen to quickly change his mind about who he needed to talk to first. Of course, Naruto. Hiruzen stated calmly before turning to once again face his 3 advisors. We'll pick this conversation back up later. For now, I need to speak to Naruto, so if you'd excuse us. He finished before turning back towards Naruto. It was only when Danzo began to open his mouth to speak of this indiscretion that Hiruzen turned back to them, his eye radiating a cold, calm demand to follow his instructions. The older 3 angrily turned and with great elegance walked out of the office. But only once Hiruzen was certain that they were gone did he turn back to his favorite blonde. So Naruto, how can I help you? Old man, some jerk sent this stupid owl. Naruto yelped as said bird pecked him on top of his head for the comment. Damn bird, anyway they somehow threw it through my window, walking me up, and then to top it off it had this idiotic letter about me being accepted to some magic school. I mean, come on, how stupid do they think I am? Everyone knows magic's not real. Naruto finished with an angry pout on his face as he held the letter out with his left hand, shaking it up and down rapidly for the older man to take. And with a small chuckle the older man reached out and quickly pulled it from the grumbling blonde's hand. His eyes moving rapidly back and forth over the page, Hiruzen could only sigh as he realized that this wasn't a fake letter, which meant that Naruto was one of a very few. Naruto, it's not fake and magic is real. Hiruzen informed the child whilst he refilled his pipe, already expecting not only the retort from the young blonde but also the arrival of an old friend. What, old man, who are you trying to fool? Magic's not real, it made up for stories that parents can tell their children. Naruto retorted, his voice weakening towards the end as his own sentence reminded him of just how much he didn't have, as well as drawing a rather sorrowful look from the old man across the desk from him. Well, Naruto, as hard as it may be to believe magic is real, Hiruzen responded. Then why haven't I seen magic before, huh? Naruto asked. Think that he had won the argument right there. Because after all, if magic was real then surely he would have seen it by now, right? Well, Naruto, you see, that's hard to explain, Hiruzen began, only to be interrupted by a popping sound followed by a voice that he hadn't heard for quite a few years. Perhaps I'd be a better chose to explain that, don't you think? Came a new voice from behind Naruto, causing said young man to spin around his hand once again, reaching for a kunai knife, only to stop mid-turn as his eyes landed on one of the strangest people he had ever seen. The person was a rather old man with a long white beard. I mean, this thing reached his waist, as well as long white hair that managed to reach the same area, causing Naruto to wonder if this man had ever had a haircut. Sadly, though, it wasn't his massive amount of hair that gave Naruto the biggest surprise. No, that belonged to the rather long purple-colored with stars decorating it dress and point hat that the old man was for some ungodly reason wearing. It was enough to make it so that Naruto ended up missing the greeting between the 2 old men, as well as the unknown old man's first attempted introduction to the boy. Huh? Naruto asked as he finally came back to reality, from having the old man's hand basically shoved in his face. I said hello, my name is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, and you must be young Naruto Uzumaki, correct? The now named Dumbledore repeated, the large smile still present upon his face as he looked down at the young blonde, and for the first time Naruto noticed not only the half-moon glasses that the old man wore, but more importantly, at least to Naruto, was the way that he looked at him. It wasn't with anger or disgust or any of the emotions that he was used to seeing. No, this old man was looking at him the same way that old man Hokage looked at him, like he was not only an actual human but also that. They were happy he was here, and though Albus didn't know it yet, in that instant he had gained a place in Naruto's heart reserved for the people that he would protect with his life. Yeah, I'm Naruto. Naruto responded, grabbing the old man's hand in a rather firm shake, with a massive smile splitting his face as he looked up at the Dumbledore. Well, Naruto, it's a pleasure to meet you, Albus responded as they broke their shake. Now I believe you just asked your Hokage a question that I may be better suited to answer, he stated, causing the preteen to tilt his head as if he had already forgotten what he had asked. leaving him in a stance that to the two older men was quite humorous considering that he still had the owl perched upon the top of his head. Their moment of mirth was interrupted though when Naruto snapped his fingers and pointed at Albus. "That's right, if magic's real, why haven't I seen it before?" Naruto asked. The way the child not only asked this question but also didn't even think to ask how he would be able to answer this question amused Dumbledore to no end, whilst also worrying the older man about just how trusting this child was. "Well, Naruto, that is a very good question." Albus had to hold back his chuckle at the way the young blonde's face lit up like the cat that caught the canary, or more appropriately the fox that caught the rabbit. "You see, Naruto, the reason that you haven't seen magic here in the elemental nations is because of how very few people can use magic here." This statement brought a rather confused look to Naruto's face as he stared at the old man. "Well, how come not many people can use magic over here?" Naruto asked, confused. "Well, Naruto, there are a lot of theories as to why that is, but the most believed theory is that the reason so few can is because of the use of chakra." Albus explained, because the blonde to begin nodding like he understood before looking back up to Albus responding with a rather expected "Huh." Albus simply chuckled good-naturedly at the boy's actions before proceeding with his explanation. "Well, Naruto, you see, a lot of scholars believe that the use of chakra negates the natural flow of magic in your bodies, meaning that fewer people are ever able to access their latent magical abilities. Meaning that very few people who use chakra will ever awaken their magical abilities. Does that make sense?" Albus asked. "I guess," Naruto responded before looking back at the old man. "I have one more question." "Yes, Naruto?" Albus responded, a small smile still resting upon his lips. "Well, how do you know about magic?" Naruto asked while scratching the back of his head almost as if he was shy to be asking such a question. "Well, Naruto, the answer to that question is very simple. It's because, like you, Naruto, I too am a wizard," Albus responded, causing the young blonde to recoil in shock before his once happy face shifted to a rather angry glare. "Oh, I see, this is mess with Naruto Day, huh? What, you guys got together and decided to mess with me because I painted the Hokage's monument last week? Well, ha ha, very funny," Naruto said angrily as he turned around and prepared to leave, only to be stopped as the chair that was behind him sprung up and grabbed him, forcing him to sit in it. "Now, Naruto, you can't leave just yet, that would be rather rude," Dumbledore stated as he came around to the front of the currently struggling boy. "After all, I did come all this way just to try and make sure that you came to my school," Albus finished, unsurprised when Naruto stopped struggling and looked at him. "Yes, sure, prove it," he growled, causing Albus to sigh as he wished that he was still dealing with the happier blonde instead of the somewhat angry one in front of him, although he was able to admit that he probably came at that question the wrong way. So, figuring that the only way he could really fix this was to try and convince the boy to give him a chance. "Naruto, I would be more than happy to prove to you that magic is real, but I can't right now, so I'm asking you to wait just a month, just one, and then I'll come back and prove to you that magic is real, and I hope that you'll accept my invitation to join my school. After all, not only are wizards from this area rare, but they tend to be extremely powerful." Albus finished as he reversed the spell that brought the chair to life and watched, rather curious about which chose the young boy would make, only for his smile to fade slightly with each step that the preteen took towards the door without answering. Albus's hopes were almost completely dashed when the boy spoke. "I'll think about it," Naruto stated before leaving the two old men to themselves and took off running back towards his home, not even realizing that the owl had departed shortly after he had left the tower. His mind was so askew with thoughts. Unknown to the blonde, though, even without him there, he was still the topic of the two old men's discussion. "He's got his father's personality," Albus stated with a small, almost forlorn smile on his face at the thought of old friends. "That he does, but his mother's penchant for pranks," Hiruzen responded with an equally small, forlorn smile. "So tell me, Hiruzen, how his life has really been?" Albus asked as he looked to his old friend, only to see the gently smile fall as the years once again claimed his face. "That is a long story, you may want to take a seat," Hiruzen stated as he took his own, and watched Albus sink into the one across from him before beginning the long and rather sad history of one Naruto Uzumaki. It had been a month since Naruto's initial meeting with the old so-called wizard named Albus Dumbledore, although if truth be told his follow-up meeting with the old man was one of the last things on the young blonde's mind. Especially after the startling truth that he had learned from his former sensei, now turned traitor Mizuki, about what he carried within him, and though this new knowledge answered many of his questions as to why the village people had treated him so poorly throughout his youth, and though he didn't expect the villagers' opinion of him to change anytime soon, he wouldn't stop trying, but knowing that he would be talking to Dumbledore again soon, Naruto couldn't help but to wonder if the old man knew about his burden, as the Hokage called it, and if he didn't, and he proved that magic was real, would he still be willing to let Naruto attend his school? Or would he begin to look at him the same way as the villagers did? But even these thoughts couldn't dampen the hope that the 11-year-old had about magic not only being real, but also that he would be able to go to this school and make some friends whose parents hadn't warned them away from him as a child. It took Naruto roughly 15 minutes to arrive at the Hokage Tower, and only another 5 after reaching the tower to argue his way past the secretary who happened to be ready for him today. Oh, she was so getting the hell pranked out of her, and finally arrive in Hiruzen's office. And like last night after Naruto had been brought back after the scroll incident, the third Hokage sat behind his desk, although there was one difference between last night and this morning, the old man sitting in the chair in front of Hiruzen's desk. And just like the last time Dumbledore was here, he was once again wearing an insanely weird outfit. Only this time instead of a purple dress it was baby blue dress, and like last time he was here Dumbledore had a small genuine smile on his face and a wise, mischievous twinkle in his eyes. That smile and twinkle in his eyes did wonders to lift Naruto's hopes when they turned on him, not dimming in the slightest. In fact, the smile grew at the sight of the blonde youth. Well, hello there Naruto, nice to see you again. Albus greeted the preteen with a gentle, genuine smile towards the young boy who has had such a difficult life for one so young. Hey old man Dumbledore. Naruto responded with a smile on his face as looked towards the old wizard, not even realizing how badly he had just butchered the man's name. Dumbledore. Albus corrected, but even though Naruto had butchered his name horribly, Albus couldn't help when his smile widened at the youth. His smile grew a bit wider as the young man's grin went from cheerful to embarrassed, whilst rubbing the back of his head with his right hand. So Naruto, I believe that I promise you proof that magic exists. Albus stated, grinning at the youth, already knowing just what he was going to do to prove to the youth that magic was real and only able to imagine the expressions that the youth would make. Yeah, you did. Naruto responded, his hand ripping away from the back of his head so that he could point at Albus, causing said old man to chuckle at the youth's exuberates. Well then Naruto, shall we go? We have quite a bit to do today. Albus said, grinning at the child, as he went from pointing at Albus to jumping slightly into the air with a massive grin once again splashed across his face as he ran up to Albus and grabbed the older man's hand before he began to try and pull Albus towards the door. Come on, let's go. Naruto all but whined as he tried to pull the older, heavier man towards the door. Well Naruto, though I do enjoy your enthusiasm, we won't be going out that way, Dumbledore said as he maintained his current position whilst the young blonde continued to pull on his arm. Until Albus' words finally registered in his mind caused said blonde to stop his pulling and turn to look back at the long white-haired man. Then how are we going? Naruto asked, dropping Albus' arm as he tilted his head to the left and brought his right hand up to scratch at his chin. Well Naruto, how we're traveling is going to be the beginning of my proof that magic is real, Albus stated with his ever-present grin, before he turned to Hiruzen. Well Hiruzen, we will be seeing you in a little while, he stated, as he grabbed onto Naruto's hand before with a small faint pop they were gone. For Naruto this was an entirely new experience. In fact, to Naruto it felt like the world was shrinking around him, squeezing him from all sides, and then it was over. Now the blonde wished that he could say that he stood proudly and walked away from that terrible experience, but that would be a lie, so there was Naruto on his hands and knees vomiting onto the floor. Sorry Naruto, I should have warned you about the after effects of a person's first time appariating. Dumbledore apologized as he leaned down and began to rub the youth's back, in the hopes that it would make the still vomiting blonde feel better. Naruto would have responded with a sarcastic comment if not for the fact that his mouth was currently busy relieving himself of his breakfast. This only lasted another minute or so before Naruto finished vomiting, and stood back up quickly looking around to gain his bearings. Although truthfully nothing looked even remotely similar to anything that he had ever seen before, the unique cobblestone buildings, the fact that unlike where he lived Naruto barely saw a single tree and everything was so gray. Where are we? Naruto asked as he continued to look around, his head shooting from the left to the right rapidly. London Naruto, we are in London, England, Albus stated as he turned and began to walk towards an old broken-down shop, with large steps helping him set a rather rapid pace. Naruto didn't realize that Dumbledore had left until he turned to ask the old wizard, whom he was starting to believe was an actual wizard, where the hell London was, only to discover that the old man had begun walking away. The blonde stared stunned at the fact that the old man would leave him in a city alone before he managed to regain his senses and took off running after the wizard, stunned at the fact that someone Dumbledore's age could move so fast. Of course, when Naruto finally realized that Dumbledore was leading him towards a broken-down old shop, and though he wanted to stop and ask Dumbledore why they were going into this creepy shop, only to realize that the old wizard had already entered the run-down shop, which Naruto finally noticed was called the Leaky Cauldron. Before, with a deep breath, he burst through the door expecting to find the inside as rundown and creepy-looking as the outside, only to discover that the truth was the opposite. The inside was actually rather nice, still somewhat dark and creepy-looking, but it was much nicer than the outside, causing Naruto to wonder why the heck hadn't they made the outside look as nice. These thoughts plagued the young blonde so much so that he failed to notice the fact that Dumbledore had not just left his line of sight, the old man had walked all the way through the bar and out the back. These thoughts were quickly removed as his eyes fell upon an old woman wearing a black pointy hat and a black dress talking to another old woman wearing a red dress with a matching red pointy hat, and so Naruto began practically spinning in place to look at all the strangely dressed men and women that he could only guess were all witches and wizards. Albus had expected Naruto to slow down and maybe take in the sight somewhat, but he hadn't expected to actually lose the young blonde, the old man mused as he turned around and looked for the blonde boy. Before, with a small, slightly exasperated sigh, he started to walk back into the leaky cauldron, grinning as he saw the young blonde almost spinning in his spot as he took in all the witches and wizards. And once again Albus was struck with a memory, only this one included a beautiful red-haired woman looking around at dozens of different people in all. But with a quick shake of his head, the old wizard managed to dispel the memory and return to the present, smiling softly towards the young blonde as he walked up to Naruto and gently tapped his shoulder. "This way, Naruto," Albus said after obtaining the youth's attention before turning, and this time knowing that the boy would be following him, once again walked out through the back and up to a large brick wall. "Now, Naruto, make sure that you watch what I'm about to do very carefully, because I may not be able to do it a second time," he told the young boy before pulling out his wand and in a counterclockwise motion tapped the bricks in the center of the wall. The blonde couldn't help but wonder why he was supposed to watch and remember the fact that Dumbledore was tapping a wooden stick against a brick wall, but decided to just go with it. So it came as a great surprise to the youth when the brick wall began to move away from the center where Dumbledore had tapped his stick, almost like they were folding in on each other to create an archway. But the mysteriously folding bricks quickly lost Naruto's attention as the alleyway that was reveled grasped it. To Naruto, it was one of the most unique and amazing places that he had ever seen. It reminded him somewhat of Konoha, with all the young children running about oohing and awing at all the things that they saw in the windows, begging their parents to buy them whatever it was that they thought that they needed so badly. Dumbledore's grin lessened as he looked upon his young charge, seeing the rather noticeable drop in the youth's smile. It only took Albus a moment to realize that the reason for his frown was the fact that with the death of the blonde's parents on the day that he was born, made it so that not only had Naruto never known his parents, he had never gotten to experience all the little things that so many children took for granted, such as a goodnight kiss or yanking them around to windows begging for a new toy. Knowing all of this, Albus couldn't help but to feel sorrow on the youth's behalf. Deciding to make sure that the blonde couldn't continue to focus on all that he never had the chance to experience, Albus decided to remove the boy's thoughts from its current path. "Well, Naruto, welcome to Diagon Alley, the entrance to our little piece of the magical world," the old wizard stated with a grin, before he once more began to walk down the cobblestone path towards a rather massive white building with the words Gringotts Bank across the front in gold. Although truthfully Naruto barely noticed the massive building as he was too busy trying to take in all of the different sights, the brooms that for some reason they had decided to put on display, the dizzying array of animals in the following window. Of course, he quickly shifted his head to the other side when passing the windows full of books. Naruto couldn't help but to freeze in place when he saw what was happening in the alleyway across the street. The sight that had first caught the young blonde's attention just happened to be of a young light red-haired girl, backed against the wall of one of the numerous stores with her hands covering her eyes, but even still Naruto could see the small crystalline droplets of water that managed to sneak past her covering hands and fall to the hard cobblestone ground. His eyes slowly refocused from the girl's tears to the slightly older dark-skinned boy who, from what Naruto could tell, was berating the young girl, obviously the reason that said girl was crying, and seeing this caused a powerful desire to begin building inside Naruto, that desire taking form as he began to walk towards the two, his only thoughts being to make that guy stop bullying the girl. "You and your filthy blood traitor family have no right being here. Your kind belong nowhere near those of us who haven't betrayed our purity." The dark-skinned boy continued to rant, taking a rather dark pleasure in the young blood traitor's tears. He was about to continue his horrible tirade until his vision was filled with a quick flash of orange, and then standing in between himself and the still sobbing redhead was a short, spiky blonde-haired boy with 3 whisker marks on each cheek and a rather angry look upon his face. "Hey, leave her alone," Naruto growled as he stood in between the two, glaring directly at the taller boy, and fighting every instinct that was currently telling him that he need to try and comfort the still sobbing girl behind him. The taller boy couldn't help but to be somewhat stunned at the arrival of the blonde, before his shock turned to anger at the fact that this idiot would dare stop him. "Or what?" the dark-skinned boy asked, his voice coming out in a snarl as he practically dared the blonde to do something, believing like so many young boys he was invincible and that the blonde could do nothing to him. Naruto, though, didn't know what to do. After all, since he had promised old man Hokage not to do anything that would show the fact that he was a shinobi, he couldn't strike the taller boy or use any of his techniques, so in all honesty he couldn't do anything, and he hated that fact, unless... "Are you going to Hogwarts?" Naruto asked, once again shocking the taller boy with such a rapid and random change in the conversation. "Yes, of course, only the best for us of blood superiority," he stated, his voice once again gaining an arrogant tone to prove that he truly did think of himself as superior to everyone else. The tone striking a nerve inside of Naruto as it reminded him so much of another boy, only this one was rather pale with hair that resembled a duck's butt. With a quick shake of his head, Naruto dispelled the slight vision and refocused on the here and now. Good, then I'll see you there, Naruto stated with a small mischievous smirk on his face as dozens of thoughts on how to prank the other boy began to run rampant through his mind, not yet realizing that somewhere in his mind he had already decided that he would be attending Hogwarts. Although at that moment all of his thoughts were on his pranks, they quickly shifted as he heard a sniffling sound come from behind him, causing Naruto to once again remember the crying girl, making him push all thoughts of pranking the dark-skinned youth whose name he had completely forgot to get, and refocus all of it onto the young redhead as he spun to face her, beginning the process of kneeling to be at her current level once he had finished his turn. Hey, are you okay? He asked, unsure of what to do. After all, he had never had to comfort a crying girl, whose name he should probably get. I'm Naruto, and you are? The blonde asked, somewhat worried because the young girl was still crying. Ginny, the redhead responded through her tears and hiccups from crying as she looked up at the blonde boy that had stopped the other boy from picking on her. Well, Ginny, are you here alone? Naruto asked, unsure whether this girl was an orphan like him, or if she had parents and was just lost. My mom's over at the pet store with my brothers, Ginny responded, whilst also looking across the way to said store. Naruto, hearing that the girl's family was so near, couldn't help the rising panic that began to take form in the pit of his stomach. Fear that the instant that the girl's mom saw him she'd blame him or look at him the same way that so many of the other adults did. But even with that possibility, Naruto knew that he needed to get this girl back to her mother. Well then, come on, Ginny, Naruto all but yelled as he grabbed the young girl's hand and began to pull her towards the other side of the street. A massive grin splashed across his face. Ginny was so shocked by the way the blonde had grabbed her hand that she couldn't help but to stop crying as she tried her hardest to keep up with the blonde boy. It was a few seconds after he started pulling her along that she realized that he was holding her hand, causing the young girl's cheeks to gain a red tint from her blush. They were almost all the way across the street when Naruto finally came to a stop, turning to look at the girl whom he had pulled across the street, only to see the fact that her face was now red. Ginny, your face is red. Are you okay? Are you getting sick? Naruto asked, completely unaware of the fact that she was blushing, and sadly having no clue just how embarrassed that commenting on said fact would make the young girl. No, Naruto, I'm fine, Ginny responded as she looked away from him and towards the shop where she could already see one of her older twin brother through the window. Naruto, having noticed her eyes shifting behind him, couldn't help but to turn as well and see the red-haired boy that appeared to be a little older than himself through the window, and realizing that that must be the girl's brother, Naruto once again began pulling her towards the door of the shop, already planning his disappearance before Ginny's family saw him. And acting much like old man Hokage had told him that he should around girls, Naruto moved forward and opened the door into the store. Ginny, thinking that Naruto was being a gentleman, walked through the door and towards her mom. It wasn't until she had reached her mother that Ginny realized that somewhere along the way the blonde boy had disappeared. But that didn't matter to Ginny as she pulled on her mother's sleeve to get her attention, and then once she finally wrestled it away from George, began to tell her mother of the mean boy that had picked on her as well as the handsome blonde boy who had come to her rescue. Naruto had held the door open for Ginny, but after she had made it through the door he quickly let go of said door and walked back down the same cobblestone path that Dumbledore had been taking him down, hoping that he would be able to catch up with the much older man, not realizing that everything he had just done had been watched by said old wizard. Once more thinking of the fact that Naruto, even without knowing who they were, was so like his parents, always willing to help others. You'd be proud of him, Albus said with a smile as he continued to watch said blonde before with a quiet pop he disappeared. Naruto couldn't help but to begin to panic as he made his way further and further down the cobblestone path without finding his wizard guide, which caused some serious doubts to begin to rise in the young blonde. After all, how many times could the old man lose him in one day? So caught up in his own thoughts was the young blonde that he failed to notice as he passed the object of his frustration. Much to Albus's amusement, Albus realized that he could simply begin to follow the young boy and see how long it took before Naruto realized that he was behind him, where he could obtain the youth's attention and get this day back on track. And although the first option would be funnier, Albus knew that they were on a schedule, so he needed to regain the blonde's attention once more. Naruto, this way, Albus stated as he once more obtained the blonde boy's attention whilst at the same time walking back into the lead. This fact caused Naruto to wonder when exactly the old man had gotten behind him and how, but deciding that the answer would probably only lead to more questions, the blonde decided that this time he would simply let it go. But deciding that he should probably find out where exactly they were going so that if the old man disappeared again he would be able to find his way and hopefully reunite with said wizard. Well, Naruto, we are heading to Gringotts, the wizard bank, Dumbledore informed his young charge as he continued towards the large white building. Naruto couldn't help it as his face scrunched up in confusion, After all, why would they be going to a bank? He had all the money that he had left from this last month's allowance safely tucked away in Gamachan. Naruto, figuring that the old man simply didn't know about Gamachan, figured that he had better inform the old man of that fact. "Hey old man, I already have all my money right here," the blonde stated as he pulled his frog-shaped wallet out of its place in his kunai holster, holding it out proudly in front of him. He watched as the old wizard turned to look at one of the young blonde's most precious possessions, with a gently and rather amused smile coming to his wizened face as his twinkling blue eyes fell upon the rather stuffed green frog-shaped wallet. Albus did his absolute best to hide his soft chuckles as he stared at the interesting wallet that Naruto was holding out with such pride. He could already guess from whom the young boy had gotten it. "Well, Naruto, that's a very nice wallet, but Rio isn't the standard currency here," Albus informed Naruto, unable to stop another set of chuckles from escaping his lips as Naruto's face split with a massive grin, whilst at the same time his right hand went behind his head and began to scratch up and down. Believing that the youth's current posture was one of embarrassment, Albus once more turned and began walking towards the massive white bank. Naruto sighed as he dropped his right hand back to his side before he once more began to follow the much older man towards the large white building, his head returning to its previous motion of left to right in rapid succession. The blonde couldn't help it as his face once more fell into a look of amazement at all of the items that decorated the windows of the stories. So engrossed was he that Naruto failed to notice the start of the steps leading into the massive bank. Sadly, his failure to notice said steps led to Naruto's failing to fully step onto the step, which led to his foot slipping off when he went to place his weight upon it, causing him to stumble forward in a rather ungraceful fall. Luckily for the young blonde, though, Dumbledore had slowed down to make sure that Naruto hadn't disappeared again, so seeing the boy falling, the old wizard's hand shot out, catching the youth underneath his right arm. The old wizard continued to smile at the obviously embarrassed youth, rather amused at the fact that the boy would miss such an obvious step, but he simply chalked it up to the blonde's attempt to take in everything around him. And so after making sure that the blonde was back on his feet, the old wizard turned and finished making his way up the steps and into Gringotts Bank, with Naruto not 2 steps behind him. Naruto, in a desire to avoid making an even bigger fool of himself, made sure to watch each step he took. Because his eyes were aimed at his feet, Naruto failed to notice the multitude of people around him, only realizing that they were now inside when he was forcefully stopped by Dumbledore's right hand being placed upon his chest. The unexpected stop caused Naruto to look up and take stock of his surroundings. The first thing that the blonde noticed was the large number of both adults and children wandering about, but the weird thing in Naruto's opinion was the fact that a decent number of the children wore really fancy suits. Although as Naruto spent more time observing his surroundings, the tactic that Iruka had pounded into his head, in a rather literal sense if truth be told. Although the first thing that Naruto noticed had been the young boys in the fancy suits, the next fact was that many of those very nicely dressed youths were not only behind the counters but they also had facial hair. All these facts merged together in Naruto's head to equal one big question: what the hell was going on here? Now Naruto realized that he could try and figure this out on his own, but truth be told he really didn't want to, so he decided to go for plan B. "Hey old man Dumbledore," Naruto proclaimed rather loudly to make sure that he caught the old man's attention. Of course, with the volume that Naruto tended to speak at, he didn't just obtain Dumbledore's attention, the blonde also managed to grab everyone else's. "Yes, Naruto?" Dumbledore responded, curious of what would make the blonde preteen feel the need to try and get his attention in such a loud manner. "Why are those kids behind the counters, and why do they have facial hair?" Naruto asked, in the same rather loud manner, unaware of the fact that everyone could hear him, or the fact that his query would be considered rude by the many children around him. And before Albus could correct Naruto on just how wrong he was about all of the so-called children, unfortunately before Albus could begin to explain, though, he was interrupted by a somewhat deep and obviously angry voice. "We are not children, boy, and you would be wise to remember that," the rather short male informed Naruto with a rather severe glare on his face. For Naruto, though having to look just slightly down at the rather ugly male that claimed he was not a child, only confused the poor blonde more. Albus, seeing that Naruto was simply becoming more confused by the minute, realized that if he didn't intervene soon the blonde would most likely get not just himself but Albus into trouble with the bank employees. "He's correct, Naruto, they are not children," Albus stated, smiling softly at the blonde who had quickly turned in his direction. The boy's confusion was apparent by the look on his face, and though Dumbledore wanted nothing more than to explain to the youth just who and what these children were, he had another task to accomplish first. "Now then, Grip Hook, if you wouldn't mind, I need to make a monetary exchange," Albus stated as he turned to look at the short male now known as Grip Hook. "Certainly, Mr. Dumbledore," Grip Hook responded, and though his face still bore the same severe expression, his voice had shifted to a much more polite and professional tone, causing Naruto to simply feel even more out of the loop. But he silently followed Dumbledore and the short Grip Hook up to the rather tall counter where another not child in a fancy suit sat. "How may I help you?" the white-haired male asked Albus. "I would like to make a foreign currency exchange," Albus responded, simultaneously placing a rather large bag onto the counter, causing Naruto to wonder where the hell he had been hiding the bag. Sadly, this question, as well as the many others on his mind, caused Naruto to realize that for the moment, he wasn't going to get any answers, so he should probably stop trying to figure it out. Of course, when the white-haired male behind the counter began speaking in what Naruto figured to be some type of code, he decided to simply begin tuning them out. It was a stupid code anyway, it had a whole bunch of large numbers. It wasn't until Naruto overheard the short white-haired male inform Dumbledore that it would be a low-security vault that he came back to reality, quickly making his presence known. "No, I don't want it in a vault," Naruto yelled, having realized that the large bag was full of money, and since they had come to get him money, he figured that it was his money, so he should have a say in it. Although judging by the rather shocked and confused looks upon the other two males' faces, Naruto quickly came to the understanding that what he had just decided to do must not happen too often. "Naruto, this is a decent-sized sum of money. It would probably be best to put it in a vault," Albus stated, hoping that the blonde would see reason. But by the stubborn look upon the blonde's face, Dumbledore knew that he was most likely fighting a losing battle. "No, I want to keep it with us," Naruto responded as he continued to glare up at Dumbledore, trying to make sure that the old wizard realized that he wasn't kidding. Luckily for Naruto, Albus realized that Naruto wasn't going to change his mind and that it would probably be for the best to simply let Naruto have this battle. But that didn't mean that Albus wasn't curious as to why the young boy was so set against leaving his money in the bank. So with a tired sigh and a soft smile, Dumbledore lifted the bag that was now filled with wizard currency and began to walk out of the bank, leaving many a stunned goblin. But to him it was worth it when he saw the rather large triumphant grin resting upon Naruto's face. It was only after leaving the bank that Albus decided that there were a few things that he needed to address. "Now that we're out of the bank, perhaps you could help me understand why you didn't want to place your money in a vault?" Albus inquired as gently as possible so that Naruto wouldn't think that he was reprimanding him for it. "'Cause the bank in Konoha wouldn't give me the money that I put in it back, so now I just keep it all with me," Naruto stated, an overly large, and what Albus was beginning to suspect was fake smile splitting the blonde's face. But the old wizard's musings were cut short when Naruto decided that he had a question that needed to be answered. "So what was up with all the children in the fancy suits, huh?" The question came so suddenly that it actually surprised Dumbledore by its bluntness. "Well, Naruto, firstly, they aren't children, they're goblins," Albus stated, unsurprised as Naruto's face once more adopted a confused look. "They're a magical creature, and they run Gringotts," Albus continued, hoping that Naruto would somewhat understand, only to notice Naruto seemingly become more confused. "Then why do they have their children running the place?" Naruto asked, causing Albus to realize that Naruto still thought of the goblins as children. This he needed to rectify quickly. "Naruto, those weren't children, they were adult goblins working in there," he informed Naruto. Dumbledore expected that this news might relieve the blonde, but as he watched Naruto's face shift from confused to ridiculously happy, he couldn't help but to find himself once more confused by this child. "Hey old man, that means they're as tall as they get, right?" Naruto asked, the large smile still upon his face only grew larger as Albus nodded, only to grow more confused as he heard Naruto mumble something about not being the shortest, or something similar to that, before he decided to simply let this one go. So deciding that this shopping trip needed to be put back on track, Albus quickly tapped Naruto on the shoulder before once more walking down the alleyway and into a purple-colored shop with a large pair of what appeared to be golden scissors over the door. "Now Naruto, while you are here getting your robes, I will go and collect your books," Dumbledore said with a smile as Naruto cringed when he said books, before handing him 22 golden coins. Dumbledore had barely left when a squat woman bustled up to Naruto from the back of the shop with a gently smile on her face. "Hogwarts, dear?" the woman asked as she began to push Naruto towards the back of the shop and up onto a small stool, throwing a black cloak at Naruto before he could even finish nodding that the woman was correct in her assumption. And so he stood still whilst the older lady moved around him quicker than he would expect for someone her size. It was when he stopped watching her move around him in such a rapid manner that his eyes landed on what in Naruto's opinion had to be the coolest cloak in this entire place. It was a bright orange with long sleeves and black flames decorating the bottom and cuffs. "Hey Grandma, how much for that one?" Naruto asked, only to yelp as the older lady inadvertently pricked him with the needle she was using to hem his robes when he called her grandma. "Oh well, that one's on sale, it's 5 galleons," she informed Naruto, causing the blonde to look at her rather confused at the weird request. But all the blonde knew at that point in time was that he wanted that coat. "Alright, I'll take it then," Naruto stated with his usual grin aimed at the women, who simply chuckled at the young blonde's exuberance before with a simple wave of her wand the orange cloak flew from its hanger and into the small pile of robes that needed to be hemmed. Albus had just walked back into Madame Malkin's when he saw a sight that caused the old man to freeze in his place, for there standing at the counter was Naruto in an orange cloak hemmed with black flames, but to Dumbledore the young blonde boy was replaced by an older blonde-haired man wearing an incredibly similar cloak, but as quickly as the vision had come it faded back into the depths of the old man's mind like so many others. With that ever-present serene smile still on his face, Dumbledore made his way up to where Naruto stood, the young boy's back still facing him. "Well, Naruto, I got what I was supposed to, but did you?" Albus asked, doing his best to suppress his chuckles as he saw the young blonde jump somewhat when he spoke. He managed to hide them enough that by the time the blonde landed and spun to face him you wouldn't even be able to tell that Dumbledore had been chuckling. "I don't like being snuck up on, old man, you know," Naruto bellowed, the index finger of his left hand pointing accusingly at Dumbledore. Albus couldn't help but to chuckle at the way that Naruto had finished that sentence before deciding that he needed to make sure that Naruto had gotten everything that he needed. "Now, Naruto, did you make sure to get all your school supplies?" Albus asked, hoping that the blonde hadn't spent all the money that he had left with him on that orange cloak, even if the blonde did look rather dashing in it. "Yep, I got 3 of my black robes, the dragon hide gloves, the goofy black hat, and even a winter cloak. Plus this really cool orange cloak, and I still have 2 galleons, 15 sickles and 10 nuts left over," Naruto informed Dumbledore proudly. The fact that the blonde had not only managed to collect everything that was required for a first year didn't surprise Albus much, considering just how long Madame Malkin had been doing this, but the fact that the boy managed to use the correct terms for wizarding currency did surprise the old man. Especially considering the fact that in the blonde's rush to get out of the bank in the following conversation, Albus had completely forgotten to inform the blonde of how wizarding money worked. But upon seeing the way that the old robe maker smiled at the boy's back, it didn't take very much of Dumbledore's vast intellect to figure out exactly where the blonde had learned it from. "Well, Naruto, that's very well done, although why did you buy the orange cloak?" Albus couldn't help but to inquire, rather confused at the fact that the blonde would buy something that he really couldn't wear that often. But upon seeing the rather shocked look appear on the blonde's face, he couldn't help but to wonder just what the blonde was about to say. "Well, the letter says that I have to have 3 plain black robes, but it doesn't say that I have to wear them." Naruto's statement caused Albus to freeze as he realized that the blonde was correct. Nowhere in the school's rule did it say that a student had to wear the black robes. Also, it's orange, and orange is an awesome color, believe it. With the ending of that statement, Albus couldn't help but to hang his head as the boy's rather intelligent statement had simply died, and so with a subdued shake of his head Dumbledore turned and left the shop, leaving a rather confused blonde behind him. Naruto simply followed Dumbledore in silence for as long as the hyperactive 11-year-old boy could, which was only like 5 seconds, before he once more gained the old man's attention. "Hey old man, where are we heading now?" Naruto asked, and began waiting for an answer and then continued to wait, becoming increasingly annoyed at the old man for not answering his question. He continued to glare at the old wizard's back, dogging his every step and huffing rather loudly, never realizing that his slightly immature temper tantrum was simply amusing Dumbledore. And although the old wizard wished that he could continue this little game, but they had arrived at their destination, and so with a quick turn to the left and a simple pull on the handle, Albus stepped through the doors into a very important shop for every young wizard. Naruto was still scowling as he followed Dumbledore into the rather dingy shop. After trying fruitlessly to burn holes into the back of the old man for another 10 seconds, Naruto decided instead to take in the shop around him, although what he saw left a lot to be desired. All that there appeared to be was a single chair in front of the counter, and behind said counter was simply a large amount of narrow boxes stacked on top of one another, with a thin layer of dust seemingly covering everything. He was so absorbed in trying to figure out just why Dumbledore had brought him there that Naruto failed to notice the man that had come bustling out of the back of the shop up to Dumbledore. It wasn't until said old man appeared in Naruto's face that the young blonde finally took notice of him. He was taller than Naruto by a good foot, and some inches, with rather poofy white hair, wearing a rather nice suit. When Naruto finished his basic examination of the old man, he noticed that said old man was attempting to ask him a question. "What?" Naruto asked. "Which is your wand hand?" the poofy-haired man asked once more. Sadly, Naruto had absolutely no clue which was his wand hand. A fact that he decided to let the old man know with one simple phrase. "I don't know," Naruto stated with a shrug of his shoulders. "Which is your main hand?" the old man asked again. "My right hand," Naruto responded, never expecting what happened next, as right after he finished informing the old poofy-haired man that he was right-handed, a simple tape measure that had been resting upon the old man's hip came to life and began measuring his right arm in a number of different ways so rapidly that before Naruto could even really react, the tape measure was back in the old man's hand. Still trying to figure out what had just happened, Naruto was once more taken by surprise when the poofy-haired man opened a box in his face. Walnut, 12.5 inches, with a dragon heartstring for the core. The man who Naruto now suspected to be a wand salesman informed him, whilst at the same time motioning it further towards Naruto in an obvious attempt to get the young blonde to take it. Having no desire to see just how far this man would go, Naruto quickly scooped the wand out of the box, and just as quickly regretted it as the instant that Naruto had the wand. The chair next to the counter shattered. No, not that one, then perhaps this one. The wand salesman continued as he brought another wand to the blonde, and so for the next 45 minutes the two continued trying to find a wand for the young blonde, with each failed attempt leading to even more destruction. I wonder. The old wand salesman, whose name Naruto had learned to be Garrick Ollivander in the last 40 minutes, mumbled as he turned and walked into the back of the shop, pulling out a rather long black wooden box. Could he be the one? Ollivander queried as he brought the box out to the currently slumping blonde. As for Naruto, he had never created so much destruction by doing so little before in his life. He was honestly worried when he saw the old Ollivander walk back out with the long black wooden box. But as the top was removed, even Naruto had to admit that it was a rather beautiful wand, starting out as a deep forest green color at the base, but by the time that you reached the tip it had changed to a burnt orange color. 14 inches, made of a very unique wood, with an equally unique core. Give it a wave, Ollivander stated with a small and what Naruto could only classify as rather excited grin stretching the man's face. Naruto sighed as he reached in to grab the wand, already expecting to hear something else break. But to his shock, instead of something breaking, he felt an indescribable warmth spread through him, along with a feeling that he had never felt before, as if he was no longer alone. Curious, very curious indeed, Ollivander stated, catching Naruto's attention, causing the young blonde to turn and look at him, unsure why the wand man would find him finding his wand so curious. Hadn't he seen it happen hundreds of times before? What's curious? Naruto asked, hoping that whatever it was wouldn't be something horrible. Sadly for the blonde, the answer, though not truly horrible, would take him by surprise. I remember every wand I ever made, Mr. Uzumaki, and unlike every other wand I have ever made, yours is the only one that is truly one of a kind, Ollivander stated, causing Naruto to wonder what was so special about his wand. You see, Naruto, unlike any other wand here, the wood that your wand is made from as well as its core came from an area of the world known as the Elemental Nations. The instant that Ollivander said this, he unknowingly had Naruto's full attention. The Elemental Nations. Naruto mumbled his shock at the fact that his wand came from his home. Ollivander, though beveled the boys, mumbled to mean that he didn't know of the Elemental Nations. Yes, I'm not surprised that you aren't familiar with the place. Few witches or wizards are. It's a frightfully dangerous place. But in a fit of young male pride, I decided to venture there to try and obtain new cores and wood. Sadly, most of my journey was fruitless, until I stumbles upon a fight happening between two incredibly powerful men, one able to create vast forests with his jutsu, and the other controlling a massive monster with the power of his eyes. The battle was incredibly fierce, like nothing that I had ever seen before, and so I stayed what I felt was a safe distance away and watched. It was a truly amazing sight, but in the end only the man who was able to create wood walked away. Ollivander recounted with a far-off look in his eyes, as if he had traveled back to the fight. For Naruto, though, he couldn't understand just why he needed to hear about some fight that happened years ago. How does that have anything to do with my wand, old man? Naruto asked with a slight glare at the fact that he still hadn't figured out just what made his wand so special besides the fact that it was from his home. Simple, Naruto. Because your wand was created in that battle. You see, at some point during the battle, when the great beast was being wrapped in the wood, a strand of its hair was caught and trapped within the wood itself. I found the large piece of wood sometime later after I deemed it safe to journey down into that area. I was so amazed by not just what I had seen but by the magic that the log was realizing that I just had to use it to make that wand. It is perhaps the most amazing wand that I have ever made, Ollivander stated, looking rather proudly down at the wand that was currently in Naruto's hand. But what really makes it unique is that it is made of wood created by a man named Hashirama Senju, and he is the only person to date that has ever been able to create such wood, and for its core it bears a single strand of hair from the legendary Kyubi no Kitsune. Ollivander finished proudly, still staring at the wand, and so he missed the look of shock and horror on the boy's face as he continued to stare down at the wand in his right hand whilst his left grabbed at his stomach, his mind overwhelmed with thoughts of the Kyubi and the fact that even here so far away from his home he couldn't escape the truth. Well, Naruto, that will be 10 galleons, Ollivander said, not really pulling Naruto from his thoughts as the blonde reached into his back pocket to pull out the money, only to come to the shocked realization that he didn't have the money for it, and with a quick look around the shop he realized that the man who had his money was nowhere to be seen. Wait, where's Dumbledore? Naruto asked, still looking around, hoping that maybe he had just failed to see him. He left some time ago, something about needing to get something. Why? Ollivander queried, confused at the fact that the blonde was so curious about Dumbledore. Only to become confused as the blonde stared at him in terror for a moment before he began to somewhat freak out. It took Ollivander a few minutes, but he did manage to discern through the mumbling that Dumbledore had his money. So with an amused sigh he began to wait for the older man to return. Albus sighed as he looked back down at the cage that carried the owl that he had purchased for Naruto. It had cost more than any of the other owls, but one look at the owl's eyes and he knew that this was the owl for the young blonde. He was slightly amused though, as the owl's head kept turning to take in the sights all around it, much like its new owner had. He had been gone for roughly 20 minutes, so he hoped that they had found Naruto a wand by now. He was pleased to note though that the shop was still standing, missing quite a few windows but standing nonetheless. He couldn't help but to chuckle as he stepped into the shop to see Naruto running in circles in a frightful panic, until his cerulean blue eyes locked with the large brown-black owl's orange eyes and the blonde froze in his spot, simply staring into the bird's eyes, a goofy grin spreading across his face, much to the amusement of the two older men. Although Dumbledore's chuckles ended much sooner than Ollivander's, as his twinkling blue eyes finally recognized the wand that was held tightly in Naruto's hand. "So you finally found the owner of that wand," Albus stated as he looked to the old wand maker. But the instant that he brought up the wand, Naruto's full attention was once more upon his wand and just what it was made from, and more importantly the fact that he hadn't told Dumbledore about what rested inside of him, and though the blonde was terrified of how the old man might react, he knew that he needed to tell Dumbledore. And so he watched as the two elderly men talked for a few more minutes before Dumbledore handed Ollivander 10 of the golden galleons and ushered the young blonde out. "I expect that you'll do remarkable things, Mr. Uzumaki," Ollivander stated as the door closed behind the young blonde, a small knowing smile upon his face, before he turned around and took in the state of his shop, like this for example. He finished with a chuckle before beginning to clean up. Naruto couldn't stop looking at the owl that Dumbledore had just given him. The older man had informed him that it was a European eagle owl, a bit small for its species, only being about 22 inches tall. Not that Naruto cared, it was a present to him from Dumbledore, which made it the best owl out there in his opinion. "So have you thought of a name for it?" Albus asked the young blonde, smiling at just how much the blonde seemed to already love the bird. "Yota," Naruto responded, not really knowing just where the name had come from, just knowing that it was important to him. Naruto sighed though, as by asking and answering that question Naruto was forced to remember the fact that he needed to tell Dumbledore about the fact that he was a Jinchuriki. He just hoped that he would still be allowed to attend Hogwarts. After seeing all of this, Naruto really wanted to go. "Hey old man," Naruto started catching Dumbledore's attention with the way that Naruto had spoken, his voice so subdued. Albus was curious of what could possibly have the blonde so subdued until he noticed the way that the blonde's left hand was resting over his belly. In that instant he realized exactly what the blonde wanted to tell him, and seeing just how painful just thinking about telling him it was for the boy. A fact that didn't surprise him at all, considering just how difficult his life had been. According to his old friend Sarutobi, he decided that even though he believed the young blonde should get more comfortable talking about what he carried, he wouldn't force the blonde to start today. "I already know, Naruto," Albus stated, barely catching the look of shock on the boy's face as the blonde shifted to stare at him. "You do?" Naruto whispered as he stared up at Dumbledore, having frozen in place, trying to understand just how Dumbledore could know about the fact that he carried the QB. "Yes, Naruto, I know that you are a hero, who protects the world from a very powerful beast," Dumbledore stated, making sure to look the young blonde in the eyes as he said this so that the blonde would know that he meant everything that he had just said. He watched as the blonde's face shifted through a number of different expressions ranging from shock all the way up to pure joy, and this time when the boy smiled he knew that it was a real smile. Sarutobi sighed as he stared out of his windows, puffing gently upon his pipe as he watched the sun set, and began to wonder just how much longer it would be before his pseudo-grandson got back from his first trip into the magical world. His answer came in the form of a small popping sound a few seconds later, causing a smile spread across his wrinkled visage as he turned to face them, only for his pipe to fall from his lips at the sight that greeted him of Naruto in a long-sleeved orange cloak with black flames decorating the bottom and cuffs. "Hey old man Hokage, what do you think of my new cloak?" Naruto asked as he proudly turned around to let the old man take in all of it. Sarutobi couldn't help but to stare at Naruto before shifting his gaze to Dumbledore, who had a rather knowing look on his face. "It's really nice, Naruto, but you probably shouldn't wear it in the village, wouldn't want it getting ruined," Sarutobi said, hoping that his reasoning would be enough to keep the blonde from wearing it in the village. He couldn't prevent his sigh as he saw Naruto nod before removing the cloak and folding it gently before placing it in a large bag. The blonde was about to take everything and leave when Sarutobi spoke up once more. "Naruto, why don't you just leave that here, until you go to school in 2 weeks?" He watched as Naruto seemed to contemplate that for a few seconds before placing all his stuff on the couch in the office. "Okay, see you old man Hokage, Dumbledore," Naruto yelled as he took off out of the Hokage's office and straight for Ichiraku Ramen. "He's quite a handful," Albus stated as he came to stand next to his old friend, Bath Neb, watching as Naruto disappeared down the road. "That he is," Sarutobi agreed before turning away from the window and back to the ever-increasing stack of paperwork. "Well, I must be going. I have paperwork of my own back at Hogwarts. I'll have a portkey set up to take you and Naruto to King's Cross 2 weeks from now." And with a small pop, Dumbledore was gone, leaving Sarutobi to face his mortal enemy. Naruto couldn't help the grin that was slowly creeping across his face as he watched the seconds hand tick ever closer to 8 a.m. After all, today was the day. It had been approximately 2 weeks since he had traveled to Diagon Alley with Dumbledore, which meant that it was finally time for him to go to Hogwarts. He was so excited that he had barely slept at all the night before. The blonde finally decided that 7:58 was close enough to 8, and with a bounce in his step he was up and disrobed before he even made it halfway out of his bedroom. The warm water cascading down his body was a great way to start his morning, in the blonde boy's opinion not quite as nice as if he had had enough time to go to the onsen, but sadly they didn't open for another hour, and he would already be gone, so a simple shower in his home would suffice. It wasn't until the water began to go cold that Naruto finally turned off the water and stepped out, wrapping a single old white towel around his waist before with a sigh of content he walked across his creaking floor back into his room, already knowing that he needed to get ready and go. 15 minutes later we find our young blonde hero walking at a rather quick pace towards the Hokage Tower, dressed in his usual orange tracksuit, with the new addition of his leaf headband resting proudly upon his forehead. The blonde couldn't help his grin as he passed the Chiraku ramen, waving to the owner and his daughter, memories of the lunch that they had given him after the fateful bell test to become a member of Team 7. Although as he thought back on that day he couldn't help but to feel somewhat saddened at the fact that while he was off at school his place on the team would be taken by a student of that bandaged creep. But he knew that old man Hokage couldn't not place someone in his place. Naruto was so lost in his thoughts that he barely noticed when he entered the Hokage Tower, his feet taking him all the way up to the old man's office through sheer memory. It wasn't until he heard the shrill voice of the old man's secretary, once more attempting to shatter his eardrums, was Naruto yanked from his thoughts and back into the present. And so, turning an angry glare at the old hag, Naruto stuck his tongue out before marching into the Hokage's office, already planning just exactly what he would say to the old Hokage, only to freeze, his eyes widening and his jaw almost hitting the floor as he took in the sight of the old man. Gone was his usual long white and red robes, replaced by a pair of straight black pants, a white button-up shirt with a black jacket that matched the pants over the top of it, and the old man seemed to be trying to strangle himself with some weird piece of red fabric. "Hey old man, what the heck are you wearing?" Naruto asked, his mouth still slightly agape at the unique clothing that the old Hokage was currently wearing. As for Sarutobi, he couldn't help but to chuckle at the young blonde's expense, not only because of the goofy expression upon the boy's face, but he also knew a secret that the youth didn't, and only wished that he would be there to see the boy's face when he found out. "It's called a suit, Naruto. It's what is customary for many adults to wear in London, and since we don't want to draw too much attention to ourselves, Albus was kind enough to bring me one, when he brought your trunk and the port key," Hiruzen stated as he looked to the couch at the large brown wooden box now taking residence on it. Naruto simply followed the old Kage's line of sight to see that where all of his school supplies once sat was now a large wooden box with black metal on the corners and a small metal latch at the front. Unable to contain his excitement at the fact that he had obtained another gift, something that had rarely happened to him in his life, Naruto rushed over to the couch and flipped the lid of his new trunk, at least he thinks that's what old man Hokage called it, open, and began to examine the inside. The first thing that he noticed was that all of his school supplies had already been placed inside on left, leaving the right side empty except for his orange cloak as well as a few sets of clothes that he had never seen before. But not caring about the fact that he hadn't seen those clothes before, Naruto began unpacking the small pack that he had brought with him. The first thing that he placed in was his underpants as quickly as he could. After all, he knew that there were always A and B in the old man's office, and he didn't really want them to see his underwear. The next thing in was his socks, followed by a few of his black t-shirts with the Konoha leaf on the front. Once he was sure that he had all of his clothes in, the young blonde looked left and right quickly before pulling the brown bag of wizarding money out of a secret pocket on the inside of his jacket and stuck it underneath his underwear. After all, it wasn't like anyone would really want to go anywhere near his underwear, right? Unknown to the young blonde on the other side of the village, a young blue-haired, lavender-eyed girl couldn't help but to sneeze, before quietly apologizing to her father and leaving the matter to attempt to begin her morning ritual of stock, observing our young blue-eyed hero. Hiruzen couldn't help but to smile as he watched Naruto's obvious attempt to make sure that no one saw not just his unique taste in undergarments, but also where he decided to hide his wizarding currency. Noticing that the boy was so worried about it, and after learning just why Naruto refused to place his money into a bank, Sarutobi couldn't keep the feelings of sorrow and disappointment from welling up inside of himself. Sorrow at the fact that he had once again failed the young blonde, and disappointment in his village for not being able to see that this child wasn't the QB. Sarutobi was content with watching the youth organize his new trunk, rather amused at the fact that he was organizing it at all, especially consider the way that Naruto's apartment looked most of the time. Not that the old Kage would dare to bring that fact up to the young blonde at this moment. And although he would like nothing more than to let the youth take all the time that he'd like in organizing and examine his new trunk, he couldn't help but to remember that Albus had stated that the port key would activate at precisely 9:53. Why his old friend had chosen that time specifically he had no idea, but he knew that both he and Naruto needed to have a hold of the old pipe that Dumbledore had brought as their port key. And judging by the current placement of the sun, he knew That it was almost 9:30, and though he realized that meant that he still had 23 minutes until the port key would activate, he needed to make sure that Naruto understood the fact that no one in the wizarding community besides Dumbledore could know that he was a shinobi. Although before he had a chance to call the young blonde's attention to him, it was drawn by a rather loud hoot coming from the far left corner of his office, causing the young boy's head to quickly snap in said direction, his blue eyes widening and a massive grin splitting his face at the sight of his pet owl. This being the first time that the blonde was getting to see his owl since returning to the village 2 weeks ago, he still wasn't particularly happy with the old man for that fact, even if he did understand the old man's reasoning behind taking the bird from his to make sure that it was at least somewhat properly trained in the art of mail delivery. At least that's how the old man had explained it to him when he had his ANBU take the owl from him. But now that Yoda was a mere 10 feet from the blonde, he could help the massive smile that split his face any more than he could prevent himself from dashing over to where the cage was currently perched, opening the cage's door the instant that he was within reach, watching as the remarkable bird burst forth from its cage and circled the room twice, hooting at different points. To Naruto, these hoots just meant that Yoda was happy to be out of his cage, but with each hoot Sarutobi's eyes widened, as each of the raptor's hoots corresponded with it flying over one of his hidden ANBU. But after its second pass around the room, he watched as the owl came to rest upon its young owner's right shoulder with a soft hoot. Naruto couldn't help but to chuckle as he brought his left hand across his body and above his right shoulder before beginning to softly stroke the owl. Hiruzen, believing that this would be the best time to explain to Naruto about the secrets that he would have to keep whilst he was at Hogwarts, and knowing that he was running out of time, quickly obtained the youth's attention. Naruto, though I hate to interrupt your reunion, there are a number of important things that we need to discuss before you leave, and unfortunately we are running out of time, so if you wouldn't mind taking a seat, Sarutobi said as he returned to his own chair whilst at the same time motioning for Naruto to take the one across from him. A small part of him couldn't help but to chuckle as he watched the young blonde take the seat, not because of anything that the boy did but because of the fact that even as he walked the owl maintained its perch upon his shoulder. But realizing that this wasn't the time for such emotions, Hiruzen schooled his features and faced the youth. Naruto, as you know, the outside the barrier knows almost nothing of our continent, with the exception of a few, much as a very few people on this of that same barrier know of the world beyond it. And both Dumbledore and I agree that it would be for the best if it is kept that way, Hiruzen stated, directing an expression that he usually saved for battle at the young blonde in the hope that it would make him realize just how serious he was about this. Although judging from the slightly confused look upon the blonde's face, he quickly came to the conclusion that the blonde didn't yet understand just why he was bringing this up, a fact he planned to remedy post-haste. The reason that I bring this fact up is because both Dumbledore and I have agreed that much like you did on your trip to Diagon Alley, you need to keep the fact that you are a shinobi hidden. Hiruzen stated just as seriously as before. He watched as the emotions on the youth's face went from confused to shocked, then to angry, until finally settling into a mixture of confusion and anger. Knowing that it wouldn't be more than another few seconds before the blonde's anger erupted, he quickly intervened in the hopes that he might abate the blonde's anger. Naruto, I'm not doing this as some form of a punishment. The reason that we don't want either side of the barrier discovering the existence of the other is because we don't yet know exactly how each side would react, for starters, but also we must remember the fact that besides a select few, no one on either side has access to the powers from each side, a fact that could potentially lead to war between the two sides. An outcome that neither I nor Albus desire. Hiruzen watched as Naruto sat back, his 11-year-old mind absorbing everything that he had just said. He watched with bated breath, hoping that the blonde would realize that at least for the time being they needed to keep each side of the barrier separate, and in the dark about the other side. Naruto took in everything that the old Hokage had just stated, doing his best to keep his usually hyperactive brain working at a slower pace so that he could properly take in all these facts, and then decide if he agreed with the two elderly men or not. It was difficult for Naruto to agree with what the old Hokage said, as he had chosen to believe in people, and that enough people would realize that even if those from the other side of the barrier were different, they were still living, breathing human beings. He couldn't erase the memories of how the village had treated him just because he carried the QB any more than he could erase the fear that erupted in his chest at the prospect of the other students at his new academy discovering the truth about him and hating him just the same as the villagers. So with a sigh he couldn't help but to nod his head in agreement with what the old man had said. I'm glad that you agree with me, Naruto, but now I must ask one more thing of you, Hiruzen stated, already regretting what he was soon going to have to ask of the blonde. Naruto, to try and prevent anyone discovering the truth, not only do I need you to promise me that you won't use any of your techniques that you have learned in the presence of anyone besides Headmaster Dumbledore, but I also need you to leave your headband with me, Hiruzen stated, his heart sinking as he watched the young boy's face go from accepting his request to a look of horrified shock and indignation. Naruto couldn't understand it. Why did he have to leave the headband that Iruka-sensei gave him here? Hadn't he already agreed not to use his shinobi techniques in the presence of most people, which simply meant that he'd have to find a secret place where he could train without prying eyes? After all, if he was going to become Hokage, he needed to become the best shinobi out there. But for old man Sarutobi to tell his that he couldn't take his headband with him, it wasn't fair, and he intended to make sure the old man knew it. What do you mean I have to leave my headband here? Why can't I take it with me? Naruto asked, quickly rising to his feet in outrage, slamming both of his closed fists upon the old Kage's desk, directing his furious glare directly at the man in front of him. His vision having tunneled to show nothing but the sighing white-haired man before him, meaning that he missed when Yoda flew from his pervious perch upon the blonde's shoulder, or the three ANBU that had materialized behind him, all with their swords aimed directly at his back. But none of that even registered in the blonde's mind. All that mattered was the fact that he felt betrayed by the man sitting behind the desk. Sarutobi understood Naruto's fury, having already anticipated it before he even asked the question. He knew that Naruto cherished that headband not just because it was a symbol of the fact he was now one of those entrusted with the protection of the village, but also, and perhaps more importantly to the young blonde, it was given to him by Iruka. And so, understanding all of that, Hiruzen took his time to make sure that he could properly explain this to the youth. Naruto, I understand just how important that headband is to you, but out there on the other side of the barrier they don't wear headbands like yours, so seeing you wearing it all the time would be cause for confusion to them, which could inadvertently cause one of the students to begin looking into discovering the answers to the many questions that it could create, ending with them discovering the truth not only about you but also about the elemental nations as a whole. So I must ask you to leave your headband with me, Sarutobi explained, perhaps a little more detailed than he'd usually have to, but he understood that Naruto was not only angry at this point, which would impair his thinking process, but also that because of the incredible foolishness of many of the young blonde's academy teachers, the boy's education had been barely what it should have been, another way that he had failed not just the young blonde but also the boy's parents. And so he watched as the blonde seemed to take in everything that Sarutobi had said before. With the same furious glare upon his face, he reached behind his head and carefully untied the blue cloth of the headband, the boy's expression changing as he slowly removed the headband until finally, almost reverently, he folded the cloth and set the headband gently upon Sarutobi's desk, leaving his blonde bangs that were usually hidden behind said headband to rest gently upon his brow. Sarutobi couldn't help the small grateful smile that spread across his face as Naruto laid the headband upon his desk before the blonde crossed his arms and plopped back into the chair, one of the boy's blue eyes closed while the other glared at him, and an angry pout upon his lips as he shifted his head to that if his eyes were open he'd be looking to the left. If it wasn't for the fact that Hiruzen had seen that look upon the young blonde's face in the past, he would most likely be chuckling at just how ridiculous it made the young blonde look. But knowing that he now only had 5 more minutes to explain to the blonde just where they were going as well as how they were getting there, and just what would be expected of the youth, he knew that now was the time whilst he still had the boy's attention before it was snatched away again. Naruto, one last thing, we will be departing for a place called King's Cross here in 5 minutes. Now the reason that I bring this up is because this area will be primarily filled with those who would amount to civilians, which means that not only do we need to be careful not to reveal the fact that we are shinobi, but we must also be careful not to reveal your magical abilities as well. Considering, according to Albus, the wizarding community has taken many precautions to try and keep the general public from discovering its existence. Naruto couldn't quite understand just why everything was becoming some big secret that he needed to try and keep hidden, but realizing that since he had already agreed to keep the elemental nations a secret, he might as well also try and keep the wizarding world secret. Sarutobi, realizing by the look on the blonde boy's face that he would do his best at keeping that secret as well, although he was rather amused at the fact that he could read the boy's thoughts so well just by his facial expression. Sarutobi froze as he noticed the old pipe on the corner of his desk begin to vibrate, signaling the fact that it was activating, meaning that he must have taken more time explaining to Naruto everything that the boy would have to keep secret than he meant to. And realizing that he most likely had only 30 seconds before the port key activated and disappeared with or without them, he erupted into action, instantly signaling his ANBU to collect everything and place it next to Naruto and the pipe. Naruto, we only have a few more seconds now. When I tell you to, I want you to grab onto your school trunk with one hand and then grab this pipe with the other, Hiruzen commanded, his voice carrying the same commanding presence as when he would call a council meeting back to order. The commanding tone in the old man's voice caused Naruto's back to instantly straighten, as he subconsciously knew that what the old man had just said wasn't a request but an order that the blonde was expected to carry out. So without even realizing it, the instant that the ANBU placed the trunk within Naruto's reach, the blonde boy's left hand grabbed a hold of the box's handle and reached his right hand out towards the pipe, only stopping when his fingers were mere centimeters from touching the end, his bright blue eyes locked with the old Kage's brown orbs. The instant that Sarutobi began to open his mouth, Naruto's fingers shot the rest of the way forward to grab the end of the pipe, curious of just what exactly was supposed to happen. His answer came a few seconds later when he felt a power-tugging sensation erupt right behind his navel, yanking him forward. The blonde was amazed by the brightly colored tunnel that the two were currently spinning through, finding this to be a much nicer way to travel than how Dumbledore had gotten the two around. But as soon as the trip had started, it finished. Hiruzen landed gracefully upon the ground already midway through straightening his tie as he stood up, taking in his surroundings with pleasant surprise at the fact that it was as Albus had stated that it would be. Completely empty. It wasn't until he turned to look at his young companion that he finally, for the first time that day, couldn't prevent his laughter from escaping as he found the young blonde laying face first on the ground, his feet twitching comically in the air, with his trunk resting not but 2 feet away. Naruto couldn't help the groan that burst its way from his throat as his body fell from its unnatural position, coming to a rest with Naruto's whole front now lying upon the ground looking as if the boy had simply fallen asleep there. But hearing the soft chuckling coming from his left, the blonde quickly made his way back into a proper standing position, with a red face and a rather embarrassed smile resting firmly upon his face. Deciding that he had had enough fun at the young boy's expense, Hiruzen turned and made his way out of the currently abandoned portion of the train station and began looking for a platform 9 3/4. But after spending the better part of a half hour looking over most of the train station and the closest to the correct platform being platform 9, Sarutobi couldn't help but to begin to expect that his old friend had pulled a trick on him with the platform number, and would soon appear with the infernal knowing grin upon his face. But before his mind traveled too far down that path, he noticed something incredibly impossible as 2 young red-haired twins disappeared through a solid brick wall. It wasn't until he saw a young dark-haired boy disappear the same way that Hiruzen remembered that Albus had stated that they had taken quite a few precautions to make sure that the outside world didn't find out about magic, meaning that they had of course hidden the entrance to the platform, a fact that his old friend could have mentioned before. And so with a quick jerk of his head to direct Naruto to follow him, Hiruzen resumed walking, only this time knowing exactly where he was supposed to be going. Naruto sighed as he continued to drag his large trunk along behind him, rather frustrated at the fact that not only could he use his actual strength and simply carry the thing as it would draw too much attention, but they had also run out of those carts that most of the people were using to carry their belongings. Though he did his best not to attract too much attention to himself, he couldn't help but to exhale a sigh of relief as they finally came upon the same pillar that the red-haired family had disappeared through, a sight that had somewhat shocked the youth before remembering just how remarkable the entrance to Diagon Alley was, so it was little surprise that the entrance to the magical platform would be just as remarkable. He watched as Sarutobi took a quick look to the left then the right to make sure that no one was watching him before he stepped through the pillar. Naruto, after doing a quick check of the area much as his pseudo-grandfather had, followed the old man through the pillar, unable to keep his eyes from widening at the sight that greeted him. He had thought that the other side of the train station had been crowded, but this one platform was jammed full with parents watching as their children stepped onto the train, many for their first year, and others stepping on for what would be the final time. And Naruto would have remained motionless trying to take everything in if not for Sarutobi's hand descending upon his left shoulder, as the old man began to guide him towards the nearest door onto the train. Though Hiruzen wanted nothing more than to have a little more time to examine everything around them as well, he had seen the clock on the wall and knew from what Albus had informed him that the train would be leaving in less than 5 minutes and Naruto needed time to try and find a place to sit. But on a more personal note, the old man knew that if the blonde didn't leave his presence soon, he might not allow the blonde to go at all. Considering the fact that ever since the two had stepped foot onto this platform, he'd had a bad feeling, and so with a quiet goodbye and good luck he heralded the young blonde up the steps and into the train. Naruto couldn't help but to sigh with sadness as he hadn't gotten the chance to tell the old man goodbye before Sarutobi had disappeared into the crowd, but deciding that he wouldn't let that fact mar his first ever trip on a train, he began the long tedious process of attempting to find a place to sit. Many of the rooms were already full, or the current occupants had informed him that they simply had no space for him. And the blonde was beginning to wonder if he'd end up spending the whole trip attempting to find a place to sit when he stumbled upon a room with only a single occupant whose head had turned to look at him the instant that he had opened the door. "Hey, can I sit here?" Naruto asked the dark-haired occupant. The blonde's exuberance when he had asked that question had stunned the dark-haired boy to the point that he couldn't answer verbally, simply nodding his head. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he finished pulling his trunk into the room and lifting it up into the compartment above where he would be sitting. He had just finished forcing it up into that area when a small white envelope fell from the corner of his trunk. The blonde failed to prevent the confused expression that spread across his face as he carefully picked up the envelope, not sure whether or not it would release some harmful toxin if he opened, only for his fears to be abetted as he noticed the writing on the front, quickly recognizing it as Old Man Hokage's. But what still managed to confuse him was the fact that across the front a little message was already written stating that the blonde shouldn't open it till he was halfway through the train ride. He was rather tempted to simply ignore the message and read it now when his attention was torn from the letter by the sound of the room's door sliding open once more, this time with a red-haired boy about his age on the other side asking if he could join them. Realizing that even though the old man most likely hadn't placed anything harmful in the envelope, it might contain secret information that these two couldn't know, so after stuffing said envelope into his left pocket, he turned and decided that the somewhat obvious tension in this room needed to be broken, and he was just the guy to do it. "Hi, my name's Naruto Uzumaki," he proclaimed, catching the attention of the two other boys in the room, both somewhat shocked at the exuberance that the blonde put into his introduction. Naruto was beginning to wonder if either of the other two would respond when the redhead spoke up. "Nice to meet you, I'm Ron Weasley," the now identified redhead said, directing a large grin at the energetic blonde youth, before both turned to look at the dark-haired youth across from them. "Hi, my name's Harry Potter." Naruto couldn't help but to muse on just how interesting this train ride had already been for him. First of all, he discovered the fact that the dark-haired preteen across from him was in fact famous for killing some bad guy, whose name he still didn't know, as Ron refused to call him anything other than he who must not be named or you know who, which made Naruto want to scream out that obviously he didn't know who, or else he wouldn't be asking, as a baby, a fact that even Naruto had to admit was rather impressive. Since that revelation and somewhat confusing explanation, the three preteen boys had spent the last hour of the train ride simply talking. Well, actually Ron was doing most of the talking, telling the other two outrageous stories about things that his elder twin brothers had done or about trips that he had taken with his parents to Diagon Alley or other places in the wizarding world. He was so enraptured in his memories that the ginger-haired boy failed to notice the longing looks in the other two's eyes. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he heard about the twins' prank on their eldest brother whilst chewing on the 3 beans that he had just popped into his mouth. It was a rather interesting flavor combination, but not entirely unpleasant. Though he couldn't help but to be just slightly jealous of the red-headed boy for having family stories to tell, he couldn't help but to already view the 2 boys that sat in the room with him as friends. The train ride continued that way for the next hour and a half before Ron got the idea to show Harry and Naruto the awesome spell that his older brothers had taught him to turn his pet rat Scabbers yellow, and Naruto could hardly contain his excitement at the possibility of seeing more magic. Sadly, before Ron could execute the spell, the cabin's door was thrown open by a young woman with somewhat bushy brown hair and 2 slightly large front teeth, wearing a gray skirt that went below her knees as well as a gray sweater with a black vest over the top. "Excuse me, but have any of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his?" she asked, her brown eyes glancing all over the room as she asked, only to sigh slightly when all 3 boys responded in the negative. "Oh, are you doing magic? Let's see then," she stated in a way that Naruto could only view as rather rude, as if she thought herself better than Ron. Naruto's blue eyes turned back to watch Ron as the young redhead began to chant, "Sunshine Daisy Butter Mellow, turn this stupid fat rat yellow," Ron proclaimed as he tapped the end of his wand against the fat rat's back, only to watch in disappointment as the only thing that happened was for a burst of smoke and a sizzling sound to come from the rat's mouth. "Are you sure that's a real spell? Well, it's not very good, is it?" the bushy-haired brunette stated, still sounding way too high and mighty for Naruto's taste. "Of course, I've only tried a few simple ones myself, but they've all worked for me," she said rather proudly as she quickly reached into her robe and pulled out her own wand before strolling casually into their compartment and taking the seat right next to Naruto and across from Harry. "For example, Oculus Reparo," she proclaimed as she pointed her wand at the bridge of Harry's glasses. Naruto couldn't help but to be rather surprised as he watched the tape that had been holding Harry's glasses together spun off of the metal frame, revealing that the glasses were now fixed. Having seen this, Naruto couldn't help but to wonder if maybe Ron's spell had worked and they just hadn't seen it. So with that in mind, the young blonde gently scooped up the old rat and began examining it while still keeping an ear to the conversation. "That's better, isn't it?" she asked as Harry looked first at Ron, who had a rather surprised look upon his face before turning to look at the blonde preteen, only to become rather confused as he saw Naruto examining Ron's rat. "Holy cricket, you're Harry Potter. I'm Hermione Granger," she stated before turning to look at Ron. "And you are?" Ron Weasley," Ron stated, his mouth full of food, which caused the young girl to gain an understandably unpleasant look. "Pleasure," she responded before looking towards the blonde that was sitting next to her, who for some unknown reason was still looking at the rat. "And you?" Naruto didn't even flinch as he continued to look over Scabbers, still hoping to find some part of the rat that was now yellow. "Naruto Uzumaki," he proclaimed proudly, although he was becoming a little agitated at the fact that he had still yet to find any hairs on this rat's body that had been turned yellow. Unknowingly, the other 3 occupants were rather confused at his actions, but Hermione was the first one to question him on it. "What are you doing?" she said, her tone a mixture of confusion and that same superior way she had been speaking thus far. Naruto sighed as he flipped the rat a 3rd time, the little creature slightly struggling in his grasp. "Looking to see if Ron's spell turned anything yellow," he said matter-of-factly, causing the other 3 to look at him with some surprise, although Ron's face also showed a look of appreciation at the fact that the blonde boy actually believed in him. Hermione couldn't help but to look at the boy like he was an idiot. Obviously it hadn't worked. She was so frustrated by the fact this boy was doing something so stupid that she failed to stop herself from popping off. "You mean something besides your hair?" she rudely stated. She knew almost as soon as she said it that she had failed to contain her temper, but she also realized that she didn't want to apologize to the blonde. Naruto for his part couldn't help but to stop examining the rat, becoming even more aggravated at this girl for the fact that not only had she been rude to his friend, she had just made fun of his hair. Hermione had turned to once more face Harry. "You 3 better change into robes. I expect we'll be arriving soon," she said right before she stood up, her nose somewhat upturned as she walked past Naruto and Ron. She had made it maybe 2 steps outside of the room before she turned back around and looked at Ron. "You've got dirt on your nose, by the way, did you know, just there," she told him whilst also scratching at the side of her nose. Ron couldn't help but to rub at the side of his nose where she had pointed before turning and slightly glaring at her. Hermione simply turned away from the boy's glare and began to once more walk down the train. All three boys stood up and began to grab at their trunks to grab their school clothes. Naruto was planning to just grab his awesome orange cloak until he felt a slight scratching sensation at his midsection. Realizing that it must be the note that old man Hokage had sent him, Naruto quickly pulled the note out and ripped the top open. He expected it to be a letter wishing him luck or something similar. Unfortunately, the letter was to inform Naruto that when his back was turned, Sarutobi had his Anbu switch out all but one of his orange shinobi outfits, and replaced them with the clothes that Naruto was expected to wear at the school when he wasn't training. It also went on to explain that Albus was allowing Naruto to wear the orange cloak instead of the normal black one that students were expected to wear, so the least that Naruto could do was to wear the standard issue clothing under said robe. Naruto's eyes widened in horror as he read the note 2 more times, hoping that maybe he had read it wrong, before quickly ripping down his trunk and throwing it open, his eyes widening further at the sight that greeted him, as sitting in 3 neat piles were white button-up shirts, black pants, and gray sleeveless sweater vests. A pair of black tennis shoes rested beside them, with what appeared to be 3 of those red pieces of fabric that Sarutobi had called a tie resting gently on top of the sweater vests. Naruto wanted to scream and rant about the fact that the old man expected him to wear this stuff, and more than that, he had left him with only 2 pairs of his regular shinobi clothes. Sadly though, he realized that ranting and raving wouldn't do him any good, which meant that he only had 2 options. Option 1, he just throws his orange robe over what he's wearing right now and most likely get in trouble for it with old man Dumbledore. Or option 2, he just suck it up and put on the stupid clothes. Knowing that the only option he really had was option 2, Naruto sighed before he grudgingly began to remove his clothes and exchange them for his school clothes, although with a few alterations. Naruto, you're supposed to wear the vest and the tie, Harry whispered to the blonde boy as they disembarked from the train, leaving their trunks and animals on board at the conductor's request. Don't want to, Naruto stated definitively as they continued following the group of youths in front of them. The blonde didn't understand the dark-haired boy's issue. He thought that it looked better like this personally. Naruto, unlike the other students, wasn't wearing the gray sweater vest, leaving his white button-up shirt exposed to the world. He had also foregone the tie, instead deciding to leave the top button undone as well as to flip up the collar of the white shirt. His orange cloak flowing proudly in the breeze behind him, catching the attention of everyone around his at the fact that he was so publicly going against what they all thought was the school's dress code. Harry couldn't help but to sigh at the blonde preteen before deciding that it would simply be easier to let the blonde do what he wanted and leave it to the teachers to sort out. Ron couldn't help but to chuckle lightly at the scene, as the 3 preteen boys walked towards the voice yelling for first years. Hello, Harry, the massive man holding the lantern greeted as soon as the 3 boys had stopped before him. Naruto couldn't help but to stare in amazement at the man, having never seen someone so large before. Hey Hagrid, Harry greeted back. Having already met Hagrid, he wasn't surprised by the massive man. Ron, on the other hand, failed to suppress a surprised woe at the sight of the man. Hagrid, having done this for years, didn't even seem to blink at the surprised reactions of the students that currently surrounded him. Right then, this way to the boats. Come on then, follow me, Hagrid bellowed before he turned and began walking away from them. Many of the students continued to talk amongst themselves as they walked. Most of the topics were about what spells they might learn or what house they might end up in. Naruto was still somewhat confused about how exactly they were placed into the houses, mainly because Ron had explained it so poorly. But the conversation slowly died out as they traveled farther and farther. Naruto was actually beginning to wonder if Hagrid actually knew exactly where they were going, until he saw the moon reflecting off of a lake that was just coming into view ahead of them. He could just make out a long row of boats along the bank. The rest of the short journey to the shore had been simple, and now all of the students sat 2 to 3 to a boat. Harry, Ron, and Naruto were one of the groups that had decided to sit 3 to a boat, and all 3 of the preteens were doing their best to see something other than the inky blackness that surrounded them. It wasn't until the first gasps were heard that the 3 boys turned to look forward. All 3 boys' faces dropped in astonishment at magnificent castle that had finally came into view. None of the students could take their eyes away from the sight, as if to look away would make the castle disappear. The boats continued on their journey, taking all the new students into a hidden cavern at the base of a large cliff that the castle sat on. Naruto couldn't help but to stare in wonder as the new students made their way up the stone steps. On each side the walls were covered with pictures of knights and maidens, or old wizards, but what amazed Naruto the most was the fact that the pictures were moving. Now normally Naruto would be freaking out about this because he was deathly afraid of ghosts. But he had overheard Hermione explaining to another girl that they were magically altered, not haunted. It had been almost 10 minutes since they had left the boats and began the long trek up the stairs, with Harry, Ron, and Naruto leading the pack, only to discover that at the top of the next set of stairs was an old woman wearing long black robes and, in Naruto's opinion, ridiculous pointy black hat blocked their path, a large set of wooden doors behind her. Welcome to Hogwarts, she said, her voice echoing through the halls so that every student would hear her. Now in a few moments you will pass through these doors and join your classmates. But before you may proceed you must be sorted into your houses. As she finished saying this, all three boys looked at each other, none of the three wanting to separate it from the others. They are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Now while you're here your house will be like your family. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as the thought of having something like a family filled him with a warm sensation that he had rarely felt before. Your triumphs will earn you points. Any rule breaking. Her eyes seemed to lock onto Naruto as she said this, causing said boy to wonder if the old man had told her about some of his pranks, having no clue that the reason behind her look was because of his clothing. Will lose you points at the end of the year. The house with the most points is awarded the house cup. She continued, her eyes now once more taking in all of the students. She was about to continue when she was interrupted by a somewhat round brown-haired boy's bellow of Trevor. She simply stared at the boy that had interrupted her as he rushed forward and grabbed his toad. Naruto couldn't help but to cringe at the look that the old woman was giving the boy even after he had apologized and began to make his way back into the crowd of students, seemingly hoping to disappear amongst the giggles of his soon-to-be classmates. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly, she finished before turning around and walked through the doors. Naruto couldn't help but to look towards the two boys that he had just begun to consider friends and wonder if they would all be put in the same house, and if not, would they still be able to be friends. It's true then, a voice echoed up from behind them, causing everyone to turn around to look at the speaker, which happened to be a young boy with white blonde hair. What they're saying on the train? Harry Potter has come to Hogwarts, the boy finished. Many of the other students began to whisper in excitement at this news. This is Crabbe and Goyle, the blonde stated as he gestured his head towards the two round boys standing next to him. And I'm Malfoy, he said, like everyone should be impressed by his name, while at the same time walking in front of Harry. Draco Malfoy, he finished, looking down at Harry as Draco had taken the step above him. Ron failed to suppress a slight snort at the blonde's name, causing said blonde to turn and glare at him. Think my name's funny, do you? No need to ask you. Yours red hair and a hand-me-down robe. You must be a Weasley, he sneered, causing Ron to look down in just a little bit of shame. Seeing one of his new friends get insulted like that really ticked Naruto off, but before he got the chance to lose his temper, the blonde bastard was once more talking to Harry. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are better than others. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort, he stated while once more looking at Ron, unknowingly infuriating Naruto even further. I can help you with that, he finished, extending his hand towards Harry, as if expecting the dark-haired boy to grasp it and tell him thank you for saving him from making such a huge mistake. What Malfoy didn't realize was that he had not only just made himself a target on the prankster king of Konoha lists, but he had also simply shown Harry what type of people he wanted to hang out with, and that was the blonde-haired boy with whisker marks on his cheeks and the redhead that was standing next to him. I think I can tell the wrong sort for myself, thanks, Harry stated as he looked directly at Malfoy. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as the greasy blonde-haired boy's face shifted from one of surprise to the beginnings of a look of anger when the old woman's hand fell upon his shoulder, signaling the blonde back to his spot. Follow me was her simple command, and follow her they did, through the large wooden doors and into a massive banquet hall, with 4 gigantic tables spaced evenly throughout the hall and large banners cascading down, each with a different color and animal upon them, with hundreds of soft burning candles floating in midair. But Naruto and the other students barely noticed them or the hundreds of other people around them, as all eyes were turned towards the roof or lack thereof. Naruto's smile couldn't spread much further as he looked upon the stars, his mind drifting back to the times that he'd spend the whole night lying upon his idol, the 4th Hokage's stone head, and staring at them. His attention was taken from the roof as the old woman that had led them through the doors once more began to speak. The first thing that Naruto noticed, though, as he looked towards her was the ratty old hat that was placed upon the stool next to her. Now before we begin, Professor Dumbledore would like to say a few words, she stated, causing all eyes to turn to the old man, who had just stood up. I have a few start-of-term notices I wish to announce. First years, please note that the Dark Forest is strictly forbidden to all students. Also, our caretaker Mr. Filch has asked me to remind you that the 3rd floor corridor on the right side is out of bounds. To everyone who does not wish to die a most painful death. Naruto couldn't keep the smile off his face as he heard that, already considering the forest to be a suitable place to train, since it being of limits meant that no one would go there and see him training, and he couldn't help but to see that comment about the 3rd floor corridor as a challenge. Now when I call your name, you will come forth. I shall place the sorting hat on your head and you will be sorted into your houses, the old woman stated as she lifted the hat off the stool before looking at the scroll in her hands. Hermione Granger, she called out, causing all eyes to turn towards the bushy brunette preteen who began to walk up the steps, mumbling to herself to calm down and relax. Mental that one, I'm telling you, Ron mumbled to Harry and Naruto. Harry simply nodded in agreement, but what Ron hadn't expected was for the sharp, somewhat painful blow to the stomach courtesy of Naruto's elbow. What was that for? Ron wheezed out as he glared at the blonde whiskered boy. Naruto simply looked at him before turning back to watch as the girl was sorted into Gryffindor. It wasn't because Naruto liked the girl that he had elbowed Ron. Truth be told, he wasn't really a big fan of her. She was rude and seemed rather stuck up, but old man Sarutobi had taught him to try and be polite to girls. Unless they were enemies, that is. The next boy called to the stool was that blonde jerk Malfoy. Naruto and the others watched as the hat barely touched the boy's head before bellowing out Slytherin. "There no witch or wizard that went bad wasn't in Slytherin," Ron whispered to the other two boys, causing both to nod their heads at the new fact. This process went on for another 10 minutes before Ron was called up. Naruto clapped the red head on the back as he passed the two up to the stool. The hat had barely been on his head for a minute when it bellowed out Gryffindor. Naruto and Harry watched as their red-haired friend joined a group of 3 other redheads. But everything changed with the next name she called. Harry Potter. It was a simple phrase, but the instant that it left her mouth the entire hall fell silent. Naruto watched his dark-haired friend as he slowly made his way up towards the stool, all eyes focused on the young boy. Naruto watched as Harry sat upon the stool, the hat placed upon his head. The seconds ticked by like minutes to the blonde as he watched his friend's face shift from shock to confusion, and finally to determination as his green eyes looked at the Slytherin table. "Gryffindor," the hat bellowed. Naruto smiled at his bespectacled friend as Harry ran towards the cheering Gryffindor table, a loud chant of "We got Potter" erupting from said table. It took 3 minutes for the teachers to get the students back under control so that they could continue the sorting ceremony. Naruto watched as the group of first year became smaller and smaller until he was the only one left waiting to be sorted. "Naruto Uzumaki," she finally called. Said boy walked calmly up the steps to the stool, his eyes locking on the smiling visage of Dumbledore for a second before he turned to look at the students, and sat on the stool. He didn't know what to expect as the hat was placed upon his head, but the one thing he hadn't expected was for a voice to go off inside of it. "Interesting, I see great determination, as well as a will to prove yourself and a craving for friendship." The voice of the hat echoed in his mind as Naruto did his absolute best not to freak out at the fact that the hat was in his mind. "I can also see great pain and loneliness, as well as a deeply repressed anger, and what's this? I can sense a great power hidden deep within you, such anger and malice radiating from it," the hat said, and Naruto could hear the slight tremor in the voice as he realized that the power the hat was sensing must be the Kyuubi's. "Such a strong desire to prove yourself, and such determination. What's this? I see such a powerful desire to protect. Well, in that case." Naruto couldn't help but to wait with bated breath for the hat's decision. Unknown to the blonde, he wasn't the only one waiting for the news. Harry and Ron couldn't help but to hope that the blonde whom they considered to be a friend would join them in Gryffindor. "Gryffindor," the hat bellowed out, causing Naruto to smile as Harry and Ron jumped up clapping as they watched the blonde all but run towards them with a massive grin on his face. Shortly after Naruto was finally sorted and Dumbledore had said a slew of words that made absolutely no sense to anyone, dinner was served, and besides the rather humorous introduction of nearly headless Nick with Naruto freaking out and hiding behind Harry until the ghost had left, dinner had gone rather well. "Hey blonde," the oldest of the redheads said, catching Naruto's attention. "Yeah?" Naruto responded as he looked back at the redhead. "Why aren't you wearing the school uniform?" he asked, causing Naruto to look at him like he had lost his mind. "See, here's the white button-up shirt and the black pants that I'm supposed to wear," he responded as he looked at the older boy as if it was obvious. He watched as the older boy seemed to get somewhat irritated with him. "Yes, but where is your tie, vest and the black robe that you are supposed to wear?" he asked slowly as if he was talking to a moron. Naruto, realizing what the redhead was talking about, shrugged before he began to explain it to the older boy. "I don't like being chocked by that stupid piece of fabric. The vest seems pointless, and the rules say that you need to have at least 3 of the black robes, not that you have to wear them." Naruto responded smugly. He watched as the boy tried to argue his case when Hermione stated that Naruto was right about the robe, causing the older redhead to turn and stare in shock at the girl before looking at Naruto again, and then simply going back to eating. Unknown to Naruto, the fact that he had just outsmarted Percy had not only won him some major cool points in Ron's books but also the respect of the 2 red-headed twins sitting on the other side of Ron. The rest of the evening went smoothly, with all of the students being led up the massive staircase and all the way up to a portrait of a rather fat lady in a white dress. Percy said the password loud enough for everyone to hear it, and hopefully commit it to memory, before leading them through the portrait hole and into the common room. The next 5 minutes was spent with Percy explaining about the common room and the notice board amongst other things before finally leading the boys up to their room. Naruto was shocked to discover that his trunk had already been moved to the foot of what he assumed was his bed. Truth be told, Naruto wanted nothing more than to change into his regular outfit and go get some training in, but knowing that he had his first classes tomorrow and having no desire to be late, our favorite blonde-haired preteen changed into his pajamas. Choosing simply to ignore the snickers that he heard as he placed his hat on top of his head, the blonde climbed into bed and fell asleep. Harry couldn't help but to chuckle as he looked at the still sleeping blonde. It might seem weird that he was chuckling at a sleeping person, but he had a very good reason, as the boy in question was not only wearing a humorous black nightcap that had what appeared to be 2 eyes on it, as well as 2 large buck teeth that sat right on the top of his forehead, making it look as if the hat was actually eating the blonde boy's head. And if that wasn't enough to make Harry chuckle, the fact that the sleeping boy was currently cuddling with his pillow made it so he had to laugh, Ron joining in as soon as he caught sight of their sleeping friend. Naruto groaned as he was slowly dragged out of the realm of dreams and into the waking world, his alarm clock being the sound of laughter coming from his left. He groaned as he slowly sat up, stretching as far as he could while yawning. Harry couldn't help but to be somewhat shocked at the blonde before him. Last night the blonde could barely sit still, he was so full of energy. But looking at Naruto now so tired, he couldn't help but to wonder if it was just a morning thing or if the blonde had way too much sugar yesterday. Unknown to the dark-haired youth, the redhead next to him was having similar thoughts about their blonde friend. Naruto sighed as he finished yawning before, with half-lidded eyes, he began to take in his surroundings. The first thing that the blonde saw was his two new friends standing next to his bed, both of them still softly chuckling at him, which explained where the laughter that woke him up came from. He also noticed, though, that both of the other boys had their school uniforms on, which told Naruto that he probably needed to get his on as well. So with a simple yanking of the curtains that surrounded his bed, Naruto swiftly changed into a clean pair of clothes, finishing it with a flourish of his orange cloak, and Naruto was ready for breakfast. The three boys quickly descended the grand staircase to the great hall for breakfast. The blonde had to suppress a pout as he saw that once again the tables lacked any trace of ramen. So knowing that he would have to go even longer without the sweet taste of his favorite food, Naruto took a seat on the right of Harry while Ron took the seat to the left, and all three quickly began filling their plates with sausage and eggs. "So what's on our schedule today?" Naruto asked Harry while shoving eggs into his mouth. Harry couldn't help but to shrug as he continued to chew on the piece of pork sausage that currently resided in his mouth. "We have potions with Professor Snape first, followed by defense against the dark arts with Professor Quirrell, then lunch followed by flying lessons with Madame Hooch starting at 3:30, then free time till dinner, and we finish with astronomy at midnight." A voice spoke up from across the table, causing all three boys to look up from their plates to see Hermione sitting across from them. Naruto wasn't surprised that the bushy-haired brunette knew the schedule, but he had to wonder if she had spent part of last night after they got to their rooms memorize it. Although his thoughts about the young girl's nighttime activity was rapidly replaced with excitement as he began to imagine his classes, his imagination already formulating images of him brewing powerful elixirs and potions or shooting massive flames out of the tip of his wand in defense against the dark art. But his mind quickly replaced those with thoughts of flying, the wind flowing through his blonde locks as he soared across the sky, performing daring acrobatics. Hermione sighed as she looked at the three boys sitting across from her. Not only had they been rude and not greeted her when she sat down, but then she finds out that they didn't spend any time last night learning their schedule. How idiotic could they be? She of course had taken 10 minutes before going to bed last night to learn the schedule. Her musings were cut short though as she took notice of the small gentle smile gracing the whiskered blonde's face, his bright blue eyes looking wistfully into the distance. Hermione couldn't help the small dusting of pink from spreading across her cheeks as she looked upon the blonde. She was quick to look away and resume eating her breakfast, her mind continuously drifting back to the look on the boy's face and wondering just what he was thinking about, as she finished eating and left heading towards their first period class. Our blonde hero was pulled from his thoughts of flight by a quick yank on the sleeve of his orange cloak, looking to his left to see Harry signaling him that they needed to leave to get to class, and so after throwing one last piece of sausage into his mouth, Naruto was up and following after his two friends down the grand staircase towards the dungeons and their first class of the year, potions. It was difficult for the young blonde, though, moving at the same speed that Harry and Ron were as his excitement began to get the better of him, and more than once Naruto had to stop and wait for the other two to catch up with him since he'd periodically pick up speed. Harry was somewhat glad to see that the blonde was once more rather hyper and full of energy, and he couldn't help but to smile as said blonde turned his infectious smile on him. The three preteens were somewhat shocked at the sight that greeted them when they finally made it to the hallway that the potions class resided in. It was easy for them to figure out exactly which door led to their class, as a large amount of other first-year students, including those not only from their house but Slytherin as well, standing scattered throughout the hallway waiting for the fourth door on the left. And so the three boys took places against the wall, well at least Harry and Ron did. Naruto on the other hand was simply too excited to relax against the wall, so while Harry and Ron talked about what they might learn in potions, Naruto spent the time remaining to examine the area, all the while not realizing that most of the Slytherins were laughing at him. All laughter stopped though as the large wooden door groaned open. Naruto froze before slowly turning back towards the door, his blue eyes quickly catching sight of the older dark-haired man whose hair looked like it hadn't been washed since before Naruto was born, standing in the threshold of the door, his aura easily signifying that it was his classroom. "Take your seats." The older teacher spoke, his voice coming out in a slow, menacing tone that sent shivers up many of the young Gryffindor's spines, except for Naruto, who had experienced much worse from most of the villagers. The students filed quickly into the classroom, many afraid that if they moved slowly the teacher's obvious ire would be drawn to them. Once inside the classroom, the students were quick to take their seats, many remaining in the groups that they had formed over the course of the previous night and that morning, As such, Ron took the seat to the far left with Harry sitting right next to him, followed by Hermione, much to Naruto's irritation. And then Naruto himself taking the final seat at their bench, right beside Hermione. His attention was quickly drawn to the front as Professor Snape came back into the room and up to the front. Naruto did notice Harry pulling out a notebook and placing it onto the desk, as well as an inkwell and quill. There will be no foolish wand waving or silly incantations in this class. As such, I don't expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion making. Naruto couldn't help but to feel rather aggravated with the fact that this teacher seemed to be insulting everyone in the class. Like they weren't worth his time. However, for those select few, Naruto noticed that right after Professor Snape said this, his eyes instantly looked to Malfoy, a fact that told Naruto that this teacher would most likely play favorites, and so realizing that fact, he decided that he'd simply tune the greasy-haired man out and read Harry's notes later maybe. After all, he had more important things to think about, like the training that he was planning for when he snuck out to the dark forest tonight. Who possessed the predisposing? I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame and brew glory and even put a stopper in death. The instant he said that, Snape unknowingly had Naruto full attention back, as the possibility to stop death, even just temporarily, would be a major help to any shinobi. But as the blonde continued to watch the older male, he noticed how his eyes darkened as they fell upon Harry, who was diligently taking notes. Then again, maybe some of you have come to Hogwarts in possession of abilities so formidable that you feel confident enough to not pay attention. The blonde was so focused on what the professor was doing that he barely noticed Hermione elbow Harry and signal him to pay attention with a quick jerk of her head. Mr. Potter, our new celebrity, tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Snape asked. Naruto knew that it was a question that Harry wouldn't know the answer to. In fact, he'd be surprised if anyone beside Hermione, whose hand he had seen shoot skyward the instant that the question was finished, knew the answer. Harry simply shook his head in the negative. You don't know? Well, let's try again. Where, Mr. Potter, would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar? Hermione's arm seemed to stretch even further, trying to get Snape's attention, and once again Naruto knew that she was the only person in the class that could answer the question, which meant that the professor was doing his absolute best to humiliate one of Naruto's friends. I don't know, sir, Harry admitted, his voice low, a fact that told Naruto that Harry was somewhat embarrassed by the fact that he was being called out and didn't have the answer. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfbane? Snape asked again, and Naruto watched out of the corner of his eye as Hermione stretched even further, a little gasp-type noise coming from her as she did so. I don't know, sir, Harry admitted once more, and by this point it was obvious to Naruto that Harry felt somewhat stupid by the fact that he didn't know these answers, but even more than that, Snape had made it clear to everyone that he not only disliked Harry but would even resort to humiliating him in class. A fact that pissed Naruto off, not only because Harry was one of his friends but also because it reminded the young blonde way too much of his time in the Ninja Academy. Pity, clearly fame isn't everything, is it, Mr. Potter? Snape drawled out arrogantly, and Naruto was just about at the point of bursting until Harry spoke up. Clearly Hermione knows, seems a pity not to ask her. Harry responded, his embarrassment obviously being replaced with anger as he lashed out at the greasy-haired potions master, and Naruto couldn't help but to smile as his dark-haired friend stood up for himself, as well as to give credit to the one person in the class who had obviously studied a lot. Silent, Snape drawled out, and Naruto was beginning to wonder if the man's voice changed at all or if that was simply how he talked all the time. It was clear to everyone though that Harry's reaction had angered the potions teacher. This fact became abundantly clear when he quickly walked between the desks and pulled a stool up across from Harry. Put your hand down, you silly girl. Snape bit out as he sat down. Our blonde hero became even angrier at the fact that this teacher had simply brushed Hermione away. For your information, Potter, asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the draught of the living dead. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant which also goes by the name of aconitum, Snape explained to Harry. As if any idiot on the street would know this. Well, why aren't you all copying this down? Snape asked, his voice rising for the first time since Naruto had entered the man's classroom. The classroom was filled with the sounds of books rapidly opening and then followed by quills trying to take down all the notes as fast as the student could write. But Naruto either opened his notebook or picked up his quill. He was so furious with the so-called teacher, and so the blonde simply continued to glare him. And Gryffindors note that 5 points will be taken from your house for your classmate's cheek, Snape stated as he began jotting something down in his journal. This comment, as well as the snickers from the Slytherin students sitting in front and to the left of them, proved to be the final straw for Naruto as his anger got the better of him, and the blonde all but jumped to his feet. How should Harry have known any of that, huh? Naruto bellowed out, catching not just the other students by surprise but Snape as well. I mean, isn't that why we're in this class, so that you can teach us all that stuff? If we already knew it, then why would we be here, you know? He continued. Snape was rather surprised at the fact that this blonde student would have the brass to stand up to him like this in front of everyone, Even if Dumbledore had already informed everyone about the fact that the boy had found a rather simple loophole in the school uniform policy which meant that they couldn't remove points for his outfit, he never expected the boy to be brazen enough to question him. Much like Snape and the other students, Harry was shocked at the fact that Naruto had stood up against the teacher, but his surprise was quickly replaced by a feeling of gratitude to the whiskered boy. Naruto subconsciously knew that he was in trouble for yelling at the teacher, but those thoughts were shoved far to the side as he continued to glare at Snape. Also, aren't you supposed to acknowledge students that do know the answer, not just blow them off? He continued, never noticing the look of shock that spread across Hermione's face as she looked up to the blonde, amazed that he would call the professor out on her behalf as well. The blonde was about to continue his rant until he was cut off by Snape's furious whisper. 20 points from Gryffindor, and you will go to the headmaster's office, now. Snape growled out, his voice still low, but the underlying current froze everyone, except that is for Naruto, whose blue eyes continued to glare at the potions master. Naruto, easily understanding that this wasn't a request from the potions teacher but a command, quickly grabbed his stuff. Before he spun and marched out the door, he didn't care that all the other students' eyes had been on him, or that he had been kicked out of his first class on the first day of school. He felt a little bad about losing 20 points for Gryffindor, but standing up for his friend was more important than 1,000 points in his opinion. Naruto sighed as he stood in front of the gargoyle that the painting of the picnicking couple had told him led to Old Man Dumbledore's office. When Naruto had first left the potions classroom, he hadn't felt anything about the fact that he had talked back to Snape, but now, as he stood in front of the gargoyle that would lead him to one of the few people who knew the complete truth about him and had still chosen to accept him, couldn't help but to feel a little bit of fear at what might happen. Next, what if the old headmaster wanted him to leave, or he chose to reveal his secret? Naruto didn't want to believe that the old man would do anything of the sort, but his fear and the memories of how he was treated in the village kept rushing back to the forefront of his mind. Sherbet Lemon, an old voice, spoke up from behind the blonde, causing said boy's eyes to widen before slowly turning to look at the man who had spoken. His blue eyes easily found the tall figure of the headmaster standing there. "Well, shall we?" Albus asked as he gestured the blonde forward before following said blonde up the spiral staircase and into his office. Naruto couldn't help but to look around, his eyes shining with amazement as he looked at all the items that were spaced around the room. Many of them were gold, some of which whirled while others released small clouds of smoke, or showed silhouette of people. Albus couldn't suppress the smile that spread across his face as he watched the young blonde take note of everything in his office. Sadly, though, he knew that he had to bring the blonde's attention back to the reason he was sent here. "Naruto, would you mind telling me why you're here instead of in class?" Dumbledore asked as he looked at the blonde youth. He noticed when the boy's back seemed to become rather rigid before the blonde turned to face him. Albus also noticed the slight fear that the boy was trying so hard to conceal. "Snape sent me," Naruto responded somewhat angrily, causing the old headmaster's eyes to widen just slightly at the anger that the boy's voice had conveyed. "Professor Snape, Naruto, and why did he send you here?" he asked again. Naruto sighed before he went on to explain everything that had happened in his potions class, from the moment that he walked into the classroom and sat down beside Hermione to the instant that he left after berating the teacher. And through all of this, Dumbledore simply sat back and listened with his hands steepled under his chin. He listened as the boy explained his thoughts on the teacher, many of which were not particularly pleasant, until the boy had obviously decided that he had said enough and plopped down in the seat across the desk from the old headmaster. Albus simply sat there for almost a minute after Naruto had finished, not saying anything. "Naruto, while I admire the fact that you stood up for your friends, Professor Snape is a teacher here at Hogwarts, and as such he should be afforded the respect that title affords him," Dumbledore informed Naruto. He watched as the blonde seemed to sigh and look away, trying to play the tough guy, but Albus could see that what he had said affected the young blonde. "Now, Naruto, on to your punishment," Dumbledore stated, causing the blonde to look at him. "Snape already took 20 points from Gryffindor," Naruto said as he stared at Dumbledore. "Yes, Naruto, but Professor Snape also found it necessary to send you here, so you'll be joining Hagrid tonight in gathering specific potions ingredients from the Dark Forest," the old headmaster stated, making sure to put a heavy emphasis on the word professor. Naruto simply crossed his arms and turned his head to the side again, resuming what Albus would consider the boy's tough guy act. "I will ask Professor Snape to give Hagrid a list of the ingredients that he needs from the Dark Forest before this evening, and then after dinner you and Hagrid will enter the forest and obtain them," Dumbledore continued as he watched the boy, his eyes obtaining a slightly more serious look than before. "Naruto, I know how difficult it can be as a new student, especially when you're having to hide so much, so if you ever need anyone to listen, I'm always available." Although Albus never expected the blonde to take him up on the offer, he felt that he needed to let Naruto know. Naruto sighed before his head shifted to look at the old man with a large smile on his face, his left hand having disappeared behind his head. "Now, Naruto, sadly this conversation has taken longer than we planned, and you missed your defense against the Dark Arts class, so if you would like to make your way to the Great Hall for lunch, I understand that there may be a new dish," Dumbledore stated with a smile as he watched the young blonde leap from the chair and dash out of the office and towards the Great Hall. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he finally made it into the Great Hall, his blue eyes quickly finding the steaming bowls of perfection sitting evenly spaced along all four of the massive tables. And so after finding an open seat, our blonde hero snatched a bowl from the middle of the table and after muttering a quick blessing, Naruto rapidly dug in, rapidly finishing one bowl after another. Harry was worried about his blonde whiskered friend, as neither he nor Ron had seen or heard from the boy since Snape had sent him to see the headmaster, and Harry couldn't help but to feel somewhat guilty since in his opinion if he hadn't talked back to the rude potions master then Naruto wouldn't have had to defend him. His worries were replaced by feelings of relief at the sight of the whiskered blonde sitting at the end of the table. His relief was short-lived though as he noticed a large stack of empty bowls balancing precariously next to the blonde, while said boy was happily slurping what appeared to be noodles out of another bowl. Ron was the first one to begin walking towards the blonde who was still happily slurping at the bowl of noodles, his hunger easily overriding his slight disgust at the way the blonde boy was eating, and so after taking a seat directly across from Naruto, Ron grabbed at his first piece of chicken. Harry followed at a much more sedated pace, his appetite having been tempered by the sight of Naruto gorging himself on so much food. The dark-haired boy merely picked at the mashed potatoes that he had scooped onto his plate, his disgust at the amount of food that Naruto was consuming rapidly diminishing only to be replaced by the same feelings of guilt that had been plaguing him since the whiskered boy was sent to Dumbledore's office. Naruto, I'm sorry. Harry muttered softly, catching both boys as well as the girl who had just sat not that far from him by surprise. Resonated from Naruto's throat as he looked towards Harry, his head tilted to the side in confusion at the strange apology. If not for the fact that many people were still looking at the dark-haired youth in confusion, they would have found Naruto's appearance hilarious, his blue eyes wide in confusion, his head tilted to the left, and a large amount of noodles hanging from his lips almost like a waterfall. You got in trouble with Snape because of me. Harry muttered, his tone low in regret. Harry's head shifted to the left at the rather loud slurping noise. He couldn't help but to be rather disgusted by the sight of the waterfall of noodles rapidly disappearing into the blonde boy's mouth, so much so that Naruto's cheeks puffed out slightly for a second before in one large swallow all the noodles disappeared down the boy's throat. Harry, you didn't get me in trouble with Snape, Naruto stated, that same massive smile stretched across his face. Harry couldn't help but to still feel guilty and was about to say as much if not for the blonde boy's interruption. Besides, Naruto started causing Harry's head to shift so that he could look at the blonde. The dark-haired boy was shocked to see that Naruto was no longer looking at him, but at the empty bowl in front of him, a small smile on his face. Some things are worth getting into trouble for, like friends. Harry couldn't help but to smile as a feeling of warmth rapidly spread through him as he realized that Naruto would go through great lengths to help not just him, but anybody that he deemed a friend. Ron couldn't help but to smile when the blonde's blue eyes quickly found his, signifying to the redhead that he was also included as one of the ones the blonde would willingly lose points for. Hermione couldn't help but to look at the blonde boy in a new light as she too had heard what the whiskered boy had said, and she couldn't help but to be amazed at just how much the boy valued friendship. She couldn't help but to wonder if he would be willing to get expelled to protect a friend. These thoughts were quickly augmented with a wish that she had a friend willing to do that much for her. After all, Hermione was well aware of the fact that she wasn't particularly well liked by the other students, even those in her own house. Thanks, Harry whispered as he smiled at the whiskered blonde, receiving that same massive smile that seemed to come so naturally to the blonde boy, quickly turning away when said blonde went for what appeared to be his sixth bowl of noodles. Lunch continued in relative silence for the three boys, each too absorbed in eating what they had placed upon their plate, or bowl. Naruto had just finished his ninth bowl of ramen when he remembered that he had missed one of the two classes that he really wanted to attend. Hey Harry, Naruto said, looking to the dark-haired youth who had just inserted a spoonful of mashed potatoes into his mouth. Harry shifted his head to the left, giving the blonde boy a look to show that he had his attention. What happened in Defense Against the Dark Arts? Naruto asked, causing Harry's eyes to widen as he realized that he was so worried about what might have happened to the blonde that he had failed to pay much attention in class. He relayed this information to the blonde with a shrug of his shoulders before both turned to look at their red-haired friend only to see the same clueless look in his eyes. Naruto couldn't help but to sigh as he realized that none of the three of them knew exactly what had happened after he had left. Hermione wanted to shake her head as she heard what the blonde had asked. It was somewhat understandable, him not knowing, considering that he had been kicked out of one class and then spent the other in the headmaster's office. But for Harry and Ron, who had been in both of those classes, to not take proper notes, like she had, was idiotic. She had just finished eating her lunch and was getting ready to leave the Great Hall to go to the library when a passing Slytherin happened to stick their foot out in front of the bushy-haired girl, causing her to trip, many of the notes that she had been carrying in her books spilling out across the floor. Naruto heard the thud of Hermione's books as they slammed against the ground, the girl herself having managed to land on her hands and knees. The blonde was rather angered at the fact that the brown-haired Slytherin boy had tripped her in the first place. But his anger grew when he noticed that not only was no one going to help her, he also heard a number of people laughing at the downed girl. Hermione was near tears as she tried to scoop all of her notes up as quickly as possible. Sadly, in her distraught state, she simply scattered them further. Our blonde hero couldn't continue to watch as no one went to help the girl. Sure, she could be rude and act like a know-it-all at times, but that didn't mean that she deserved this. And so with that in mind, Naruto quickly stood up, went around the end of the table going to help the girl. Hermione was shocked when through the haze of her tears she saw a hand holding out a stack of parchment. She followed the hand up, first to seeing an arm sheathed in an orange sleeve with black flames on the cuff, up to a tan-skinned neck until finally landing on the smiling face of one Naruto Uzumaki. Her hand quivered as she took the stack of parchment from the whiskered boy. Seconds after taking the stack, the blonde was once more scooping up the scattered parchment and handing it to her, while Hermione simply stared at the boy, shocked at the fact that he was helping her. The blonde simply smiled as he stood up, extending his right arm out to help the still kneeling girl up. She hesitantly grasped the blonde's hand before Naruto, careful to mind his strength, lifted her back up. Hermione was quick to rub at her eyes, trying to cover up the fact that she had been crying, but Naruto could see how red and puffy her eyes still were. He was about to say something, but before he could, she brushed by him, clutching her books and notes to her chest. The blonde looked back to his two friends before he ran after the girl. The other two boys couldn't help but to be surprised by the blonde boy's actions. Hermione couldn't understand it. She hadn't been particularly rude to the blonde boy, but she also hadn't been very nice to him. So why had he come and helped her? Why hadn't he just laughed like the others? Why had he been nice to her? She was going to walk out of the Great Hall with her notes, without helping him, so why? She was so lost in her thoughts that she failed to notice the stairs were beginning to change, and would have quite possibly run off the edge if not for the hand that grabbed her right bicep and spun her around. Hermione couldn't help but to be slightly surprised at the boy that had grabbed her arm. It was Naruto. He had chased her. But why? "Hey, are you okay?" the blonde asked. Subconsciously, he realized that it was a stupid question here. She was crying again, so obviously she wasn't okay. Naruto watched as Hermione seemed to try and pull herself together, before she began shuffling through the pieces of parchment that he had helped her pick up, only to hold a much smaller stack out to him. "These are my notes, for both potions and defense against the dark arts," she told him. Naruto couldn't help but to stare at the small stack of papers that the brunette was holding out for him to take. He looked at her again as if to make sure that she meant it before he carefully took the notes from her, a large grin splitting his face as he thanked her. Hermione couldn't suppress the small smile that came to her face as the blonde continued to smile at her, before with a hasty goodbye Hermione was off again, only this time with that same small smile on her face. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he jogged back down the stairs to meet up with his friends as they were exiting the Great Hall, waving the stack of notes as he ran. And so the next 2 hours were spent studying the notes that Hermione had so diligently taken, with only a single rude comment being made about the girl by Ron, as mere seconds after saying it Naruto elbowed him in the side. The three boys were quick to make their way down the stairs and out of the massive doors of the castle, only coming to a stop when they noticed a large group of other students standing around on the grass, none of whom seemed to know what to do either, and so like all the others the three boys fell into a quiet conversation amongst themselves. Naruto was glad though when he saw Hermione come to a stop not but 10 feet away from them, her brown eyes obviously searching for the teacher. It was a mere 3 minutes later when a tall woman with gray hair that spiked out in a fashion that wasn't dissimilar to the blonde's own hair, and yellow hawk-like eyes that seemed to be taking in almost every detail of what was going on around her. But what caught the blonde's eyes the most was the bundle of brooms that seemed to be following after her. "Line up in 2 lines," she said. Her tone was sharp and commanding, but it was by far warmer than the potion's master, Naruto was happy to note subconsciously as he quickly hopped in line next Harry. The teacher's yellow eyes followed all the students as they quickly organized into 2 lines standing directly across from each other. The instant that she felt they were all settled, she quickly flicked her wand, causing all the brooms behind her to scatter and land in front of each of the students' feet. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he looked from the broom that was currently lying on the ground in front of his feet to the teacher who was going to show him how to fly it. "Good afternoon, class," Madame Hooch said as she rapidly moved through the aisle that the students had created when they had separated into the 2 lines. "Good afternoon, Madame Hooch," the students all responded, many of which, much like Naruto, were barely able to contain their excitement at the fact that they were going to learn how to fly. "Welcome to your first flying lesson," she stated proudly, her pride in her job ringing through with the way she spoke, as she looked at each and every one of them. "Well, what are you waiting for? Step up to the left side of your broom." Every student did as they were told. Some, like Naruto, almost jumped to the side of their broom from their excitement. Others, such as Neville, slowly stepped alongside their broom, obviously nervous about what was about to happen. Madame Hooch, finding that they were taking too long in her opinion, was quick to hurry them along with a brisk "Come on now, hurry up," before once more watching her students, until they were all next to their broom. "Stick your right hand over the broom and say up," Hooch stated calmly. Naruto and the others were quick to start, with some, like Harry, Draco and Naruto himself, having excellent luck with the broom leaping into their hands on the first try, much to Hermione and Ron's frustration. With feeling, Madame Hooch instructed not that it helped many of the students. Both Ron and Hermione continued trying with limited results, Hermione managing to make hers roll around on the ground, while Ron, much to his two friends' amusement, managed to make his broom hit him in the face. "Oh shut," Ron mumbled as he continued to try and get his broom to come to his hand. It took another 5 minutes for everyone in the class to get their brooms to obey the up command. 5 minutes that, to someone like Naruto who had some problems with patience, seemed more like 5 hours, but finally everyone had their brooms in hand. "Once you've got hold of your broom, I want you to mount it, and hold it tight. Don't want you to be sliding off the end. When I blow my whistle, I want each of you to kick off from the ground hard. Keep your broom steady, hover for a moment, then lean slightly forward and touch back down." All of the students doing as they were told during her small speech, Naruto still wearing that same massive grin as he knew that soon he would be flying, even if only for a moment. "On my whistle, 3, 2, and there it was, the sound that Naruto had been waiting for. Unfortunately, he heard another sound shortly after, this one the scared gasps of one Neville Longbottom as his broom lifted off the ground and raised higher and higher, the young boy obviously lacking any control over it. The blonde watched as everyone tried to talk to the slightly rotund Gryffindor, but it proved to be pointless as Neville's broom took him up, and away from them, and before Naruto even realized it, his broom was also in the air as he gave chase to his fellow Gryffindor, completely ignoring the shouts coming from the teacher as well as his fellow students. Naruto scowled as he tried to get a hold of the other boy when the broom began forcing him from side to side, only to have to once more give chase as Neville's broom shot for the castle, repeatedly slamming against the wall. Naruto was quick to turn his broom so that he could glide right beside the wall as he tried to get a grip on the other boy, only to have to mumble a curse as the rogue broom took the other boy into a dive. Naruto following close behind, mentally thanking his shinobi training for giving him superior reflexes as he had to pull out of the dive at the last second to continue his chase of Neville and the rogue broom. He had finally pulled back up alongside Neville as they entered a tunnel, only for the other boy's broom to buck towards him. Naruto was quick to shift to the left to try and prevent a collision. In doing so, he slammed his left shoulder against the small outcropping of bricks that made up the archway at the end of the tunnel. The blonde heard a loud cracking noise followed by immense pain shooting up his left side. He was quick to realize that not only did it hurt more than anything he had felt in a long time, but he also couldn't move his left arm at all. But that mattered little to Naruto as he heard Neville screaming again, and so Naruto was back after the other boy, his left arm flapping uselessly behind him, pain lancing up his left side with each movement that his arm was forced to make. Naruto's blue eyes narrowed as he saw Neville hanging from one of the stone statues, sword piercing his cloak, and so locking his legs around his broom, Naruto forced himself to flip upside down a second time. And even though somewhere deep in his subconscious a little voice was telling him that it was a bad idea, Naruto removed his right hand from the broom to reach out for Neville's cloak. A smile splitting his face as he managed to get a hold of it, only for it to continue ripping. Neville couldn't help but to feel relieved as Naruto managed to get a hold of his cloak, only for that relief to turn to terror as he heard the horrible sound of his cloak ripping, and so in his panic Neville reached out to grab the first thing that his hands could wrap around. Unfortunately for both boys, that happened to be Naruto's left wrist. The instant that Neville's coat finished ripping and all the heavier boy's weight was transferred to the blonde's injured arm, Naruto couldn't help but to scream in agony. The blonde was in so much pain that he failed to notice that he had unknowingly guided them back towards the castle walls, and by the time he opened his eyes and discovered this fact, it was already too late as the fast-moving broom crashed into the wall hard enough to break the grip that Naruto's legs and right hand had around his broom, causing both boys to plummet towards the ground, injuring both boys further. As Neville landed roughly, his right hand being forced to bend backwards to the point of breaking, and Naruto landing painfully on his back, knocking the wind out of the blonde. Madame Hooch and the other students were quick to make their way to the two downed boys, first checking Neville to discover that the slightly rotund boy's right wrist was broken. Before helping the injured boy up, Naruto was able to get to his feet on his own after regaining his breath, only to feel like he had failed as he noticed the other boy going into shock. The flying teacher gave him a stern look before she began walking towards the hospital wing with Naruto following behind. The trek up the grand staircase was a quick one, with Neville's whimpers being the only sound made by the three, Madame Pomfrey being quick to usher both boys into the hospital wing. Neville first, the blonde muttered, shocking both of the older women at the fact that he would put another student before himself. Naruto realized that Neville had most likely never had a broken bone, and so the other boy needed to be treated first. After all, it wasn't like this was the blonde boy's first broken bone, and with the life he was choosing to live, it wouldn't be his last. The older women couldn't believe that the blonde boy was not only able to speak but also willing to remain in pain longer so that the other boy wouldn't be. And even though Madame Pomfrey would have rather taken care of his arm first, having heard that the other boy had damaged it further during the whole exchange, she decided that she would respect the blonde boy's wishes, and so she went over to begin healing Neville. Madame Hooch, on the other hand, decided that she would go over to speak to the blonde youth. "That was excellent flying, Mr. Uzumaki," she stated, causing Naruto to look up into the woman's yellow eyes. He was surprised by the fact that the stern teacher had just complimented him when he had broken her rules the first day of class. Have you ever thought about playing Quidditch? You'd make an excellent chaser, if you flying today is anything to go by. The blonde boy simply continued to stare at her, not quite sure what exactly Quidditch was or why Madame Hooch thought he would make a good chaser, whatever that meant. Quidditch? The blonde inquired, causing both woman and the recently healed Neville, who was currently rotating his wrist to make sure there was no lingering problems, to look at the blonde-haired boy shocked as they realized that Naruto didn't know what Quidditch was. It seemed like Neville was about to say something to the blonde only for Madame Pomfrey to shoo the larger boy out, followed quickly by Madame Hooch, who had just started explaining what Quidditch was to the injured blonde. Madame Pomfrey was insistent though that they could speak with the blonde boy later, and so Naruto sat in silence as the elderly nurse began performing numerous spells to mend his broken arm. Neville couldn't help but to feel somewhat guilty as he stood outside the doors to the hospital wing alone as Madame Hooch had taken off at a brisk pace muttering about finding Professor McGonagall, but the dark-haired youth barely noticed any of that. All he really saw at this point was Naruto sitting on that bed, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, all because Neville couldn't control his broom. The blonde's agonized scream still rang in Neville's ears. Neville just wanted to apologize to the blonde, but the instant that he heard Madame Pomfrey's voice informing Naruto that he may go, Neville panicked and ran after. All, how could the blonde ever forgive him for what he had done? So he ran down the stairs. He continued running, only coming to a stop when he could run no more, and after hiding behind one of the numerous suits of armor that lined the school's hallways. Neville broke down, blaming himself for the blonde's broken arm and all the pain that Naruto had to go through. Naruto couldn't help but to sigh as he rotated his left arm for the dozenth time. Yes, he realized that it was healed, but he still felt the need to move it around just to make sure for himself. Not that the blonde really knew what else to do, as he had 2 hours until dinner started. Naruto was contemplating what to do for the next few hours when he remembered one of the more aggravating things that Hermione's potions notes had said. Professor Snape had assigned them homework, a foot-long report on the importance of Bezoar through the ages. He knew that it wasn't due for a few days, but the blonde figured that between the end of classes and dinner was the only time that he'd have to do his homework if he was going to train at night. So with a heavy sigh, Naruto marched to the library to begin his foot-long essay. It had been nearly 2 hours as Naruto let loose a massive sigh, both of his arms stretching over his head, for books spread out across the table around him, much to the blonde's joy, though he had finished his essay, and it was almost dinner time. So with all that in mind, the blonde quickly gathered his books back together and replaced them on the shelves where they started before making his way down the grand staircase to the Great Hall. He was quick to find Harry and Ron, and much to his joy they had saved an empty seat between them, so with a bounce in his step the blonde all but jumped into the open seat on the bench. Dinner was a slew of questions and surprises for the blonde, as the others wanted to know where he had been since their flying lesson. Both the other boys were surprised to discover that the blonde had already finished their potions homework. Naruto, on the other hand, was shocked to learn that Harry, following an incident with Draco Malfoy, had been named the new seeker of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Dinner passed rapidly, all 3 of the boys talking rapidly. But as with many fun occasions, dessert was served and then gone all too soon for the boys, and with dinner over, the blonde knew that it was time for him to meet up with the massive groundskeeper so that he could serve his detention. The blonde couldn't help but to send a small glare at the potions master as the older dark-haired man passed him, before smiling at the massive groundskeeper. Right then, let's go, Hagrid said as he passed the much shorter blonde youth. Naruto had to almost jog to keep pace with the much larger man. But with each step they took, Naruto felt his excitement grow as he knew that soon he would be taking his first steps into his future training area. Right, better get started on this list, and it's gonna be a long night, Hagrid stated as he handed Naruto said list. The list consisted primarily of plants, most of which Naruto had never heard of. Right then, Hagrid said as he started walking into the dark forest, leaving Naruto staring at the man's back for a few short seconds before a massive smile split his face once more as he jogged to catch back up with the groundskeeper. Naruto wanted to sigh as he carefully plucked the 8th Angel's Triumphant from the ground, before placing it carefully into the small satchel that Hagrid had given him to carry the potion's ingredients. The blonde couldn't help the slight scowl that was currently upon his face as he looked into the satchel before comparing it with his list of ingredients. The blonde had spent the last 2.5 hours digging in the dirt, or carefully picking large amounts of barriers, all of which were incredibly poisonous, causing the blonde to wonder if Snape wasn't trying to kill him. But now with the 8th Angel's Triumphant he had completed his list, which meant that all he had to do was meet back up with Hagrid and then leave. On his side mission of finding a good place to train without anybody noticing him, though he hadn't had quite as much luck. Sure, the forest was large, but he hadn't found any place that wasn't either excellent for gathering potions ingredients, or the home of some of the forest's animal inhabitants. Naruto sighed as he looked down at his dirt-covered fingers before, with a small grin, he headed towards the stream that wasn't but 10 feet from him. The blonde youth had just finished washing his hands when he heard what sounded to be heavy breathing coming from directly behind him, and so with reflexes trained by years of training to become a shinobi, Naruto spun around, bringing his wand out in a defensive position, only to freeze as the sight that greeted him was a pair of the most beautiful horses he had ever seen, both with pure white coats that gently reflected the moonlight. as well as two small bumps rising just lightly out of their foreheads. Both of the small horses seemed to be regarding the blonde carefully, and Naruto, realizing that their eyes seemed to be shifting from the wand in the blonde's hand back to the blonde himself carefully so not to frighten the two young foal. After placing his wand back into his pocket, he slowly reached both his hands out towards the two foals, stopped just a few inches from touching either of their heads so that they could make the next move, and so he waited with bated breath, as the two seemed to hesitate before finally the one on the left stepped forward first, gently nuzzling against the blonde's hand. The right stepping forward seconds after until Naruto was gently rubbing both the foals' necks with a large smile splitting his face. Never knowing that he was being watched, Hagrid stood mere feet away, shocked at the fact that the two unicorn foals would allow a human to touch them. The blonde boy must be amazingly pure for them to allow him to do such a thing. For Naruto, though, he decided that even if he hadn't found a place to train yet, this moment right here made this entire trip worth it. Unfortunately, as with all good things, this came to an end all too soon for the blonde's liking, as a loud whine came from just up the stream, causing both of the foal to lift their heads from the blonde's hands and take off at a slow trot towards the noise. The blonde's blue eyes followed both of the foals as they traveled upstream until he saw a much larger white horse step into the moonlight. The main difference between the foals and this one, though, was the fact that instead of having just a small bump on its forehead, it had a large pure white horn. The blonde watched the way the larger one interacted with the two smaller ones, causing him to realize that the larger one must be the other two's parent. A slight stinging feeling spreading through his chest as he realized that before. With a large smile, Naruto turned around and went to meet up with Hagrid before both left the dark forest. Most of the trip back was spent with Hagrid explaining just how lucky Naruto was and many other things about unicorns to the young blonde. Naruto couldn't help but to smile as he made his way into the Gryffindor common room, as not only had he entered the dark forest, but he had also not only met but got to pet two unicorns. But with all the excitement of the day finally catching up with the young blonde, Naruto couldn't prevent the yawn that forced its way from his lips, Naruto's eyes slightly drooping as the desire for sleep slowly began to overwhelm him, unsurprisingly, as it was already 12:30. So with a quick change into his pajamas and making sure that his nightcap was resting snugly on top of his head, Naruto let loose one more yawn before crashing into his bed, sleep taking over the blonde mere seconds after his head hit the pillow. Naruto couldn't help but to be disappointed by how the past 2 days had gone. Yesterday had started out with charms class, which the blonde had been rather excited about, only for it to end in disappointment when the class turned out to be nothing more than an introduction followed by what they would be covering in their first year. Although the 11-year-old blonde did get a kick out of the fact that the teacher was shorter than him. But even though it had been something of a letdown, he had gotten to spend time with his friends, and many of the spells that the old teacher had talked about interested Naruto greatly. After his first charms class was History of Magic, a class that had a ghost as the teacher. The young blonde had tried to bolt from the classroom as soon as he had seen the teacher. Unfortunately, Harry and Ron managed to stop him right outside of the classroom, and after a short conversation and a lot of bribing on Harry and Ron's parts, they managed to convince the blonde preteen to come back into the classroom and take the seat nearest the door. And so Naruto spent the entirety of the class watching the ghost float back and forth before the blackboard. The blonde did notice how many of the students fell asleep during the class, which if the blonde hadn't been so freaked out he probably would have to. Naruto was the first to bolt out of that class and head for lunch, his fear of ghosts quickly being replaced by thoughts of ramen. And so his second lunch of the school year passed in relative peace as he and his two friends talked amicably amongst themselves. The blonde did notice though how Neville Longbottom continuously avoided him, and it was really starting to piss the blonde boy off. Sadly, in the blonde's opinion, flying class hadn't been near as exciting since their first day, as Madame Hooch kept a much closer eye on all of them, and none were allowed to fly much more than 3 feet off the ground at any given time. And no matter how much the whiskered blonde asked the teacher to let him fly higher or faster like he had on the first day, it was always met with a negative answer. Naruto's day continued in the same manner, with no homework from any of the day's classes, and Harry and Ron having taken off to try and get their potions homework from the previous day done. Naruto was left with a unique opportunity to try and get to know the only other person in his year that had already gotten the homework done, one Hermione Granger. An attempt which failed epically in the blonde's opinion, as the bushy-haired girl had wanted to read her book more than she wanted to talk to the blonde, and Naruto in his usual hyperactive way had attempted to get her attention away from the book and to him. The real trouble began though when said blonde accidentally knocked the cup of water that another student had left on the table onto the studious girl, like he said, epic fail. Unfortunately, today hadn't been much better for the 11-year-old. It had started out with the blonde missing breakfast, and then barely making it to the greasy-haired potion master's class, where the boy was subjected to the dark-haired professor's attempts to get him to lash out once again. Naruto, refusing to let the man get the better of him, spent the class taking notes, all the while planning just how he was going to get revenge against the older male. The class remained rather uneventful though, and was dismissed with the students being told to do an 11-inch paper on the uses of dragon's blood in potion making. Naruto had been the first student to leave the classrooms at a run as he charged all the way up to the Great Hall, coming to a stop as he all but leapt onto the bench, and pulled the first of what would be a large number of bowls of ramen towards him. The boys had spent the entirety of their lunch break eating quietly, none of them having any desire to talk about either their previous class nor the homework that had been given at the end of it. Herbology had fallen short of what the blonde expected when the teacher had told them that most of the first-year classes would be spent doing book work instead of actually working with the plants themselves. One good thing that came from this class though was that Naruto got the chance to try and apologize to Hermione, keyword being tried, as the bushy-haired girl shushed him the 3 times that he tried to talk to her. And so after another boring flying class, Naruto retired to the library where he spent the next few hours completing his potions homework, as well as reading up on the magical community's history, before the blonde boy joined his friends in the Great Hall for dinner once again. Naruto would spend the next 2 hours hanging out with Harry and Ron until at the stroke of 9 the blonde quietly snuck out of the common room, wishing that he could leave a shadow clone behind, but both Dumbledore's and Old Man Hokage's warnings to not use any form of his shinobi training in front of the other students still rang loud and clear in the whiskered boy's mind. Naruto found it rather funny just how easy it was for him to sneak down the grand staircase and out the front doors. He couldn't help but to wonder if it would be that easy for everyone or if it was so easy for him because of his childhood. Naruto was quick to shake any thoughts of his childhood from his mind before he sprinted across the grounds and into the dark forest so that he could train. Naruto sighed as he entered another clearing only to realize that like the last few the vegetation here was most likely used not only for potions ingredients but also as a food source for the local wildlife. This meant that just like the last few the blonde boy couldn't train here and risk destroying the fauna. The 11-year-old exhaled as he leaned against a tree, his blue eyes quickly finding the moon, and he had to admit that it was rather beautiful out here. It reminded the youth of Konoha, and even though it had only been a little over 4 days since he had last seen his home, the blonde couldn't help but to feel a little homesick. His thoughts on his home were quickly erased as he heard the distinctive sound of leaves crinkling behind him, so with a practiced ease the blonde was quick to spin and face what he viewed as a threat, kunai at the ready, only for said blade to slip from his fingers at the sight that greeted him. Standing not 10 feet from him was the 2 unicorn foals that he had seen the other night when he was out here with Hagrid. Naruto was careful not to move, remembering what the much larger man had told him about unicorns as they were leaving, and so the blonde just stood there letting them decide what would happen next. The whiskered boy couldn't help but to smile as the 2 slowly walked over to him, coming to a stop mere feet in front of him. He reached out to them with tentative hands so that he wouldn't frighten them away, only for them to step forward, gently nuzzling their snouts into the palms of his hands. His smile grew as he gently moved his palms along the 2's snouts, causing both foals to step closer toward the whiskered blonde. Naruto would spend the next 15 minutes doing nothing more than petting the young animals, a small smile decorating his face the entire time, before he remembered why he had come out here in the first place. Crap, the blonde groaned as he realized that if he was going to find a good place to train he would have to leave the 2 majestic animals so that he could begin searching again. Knowing that he needed to become stronger if he was ever going to achieve his dream of becoming Hokage, the blonde gently patted the unicorn's necks one last time before turning to resume his so far fruitless search. The blonde had only taken a few steps away from the unicorn's foals before his attention was drawn back to them by a loud snort. He didn't whip around this time though. Instead his turn was much slower, his blue eyes widening as they caught sight of the much larger unicorn that was standing powerfully behind the other much younger ones. Naruto wasn't sure what exactly he was going to do next as he simply continued to stare into the older unicorn's chocolate-colored eyes. Any plans that he might have been coming up with were quickly erased though, when the newest addition to the litter group that had formed snorted a second time, this time though it threw its head to the left as if signaling the blonde to follow it. Naruto, remembering that Hagrid had claimed unicorn to be incredibly smart, decided to follow the much larger animal. The group moved slowly so that the 2 unicorn foals could keep up with them, but after a 15-minute trek the whiskered 11-year-old found himself standing on the outskirts of a rather large clearing. One of the first things the youth noticed was the sound or lack thereof. It was almost completely silent, which made sense when one took into account the lack of living vegetation. This whole clearing appeared to be dead, and Naruto couldn't help but to wonder just what the hell could do make an entire clearing devoid of life. Realizing though that with the lack of vegetation and animal life that this would be a perfect place for him to train, Naruto quickly brought his fingers together in what he figured would become one of his most used jutsus. The blonde created a dozen more of himself, before with a smile they all charged at one another to begin working on the blonde's taijutsu. Harry couldn't help but to wonder just where his blonde friend disappeared to. The dark-haired youth had first thought that the blonde may have gone to the library to do the potions homework that they had been given, only for that theory to be shot down after he and Ron went to look for him. They had continued to look for their whiskered friend for another 45 minutes, finding no clue as to where the blonde preteen had disappeared off to, and Harry would be lying if he were to say that he wasn't at least a little bit concerned at the fact that they had found no trace of the blonde boy. Harry sighed as he realized that it was already midnight, and so with a resigned sigh the dark-haired youth gave up on his search for the night, deciding instead to question his blonde-haired friend in the morning. A pair of brown eyes followed the dark-haired boy's path up the stairs before quickly returning to the large book that was held open in front of her. But try as she might, Hermione couldn't focus her attention on the book that she had checked out, as her thoughts continually returned to the fact that no one had seen Naruto since about an hour after dinner. The bushy-haired brunette couldn't help but to be somewhat worried about the whiskered boy. After all, he was one of the very few that had gone out of his way to help her over the past couple of days. Memories of the past few days came rushing back to the forefront of her mind, causing a small albeit genuine smile to appear upon her face. Her first memory of the blonde still made her question his intelligence, as she remembered him examining Ron's rat to see if the spell that the red-haired boy cast had worked at all. Hermione had come to realize, though, that it wasn't so much the fact that he was unintelligent, it was that he had believed in the redhead. This memory was quickly followed by the memory of their first potions class, when not only Harry but Naruto stood up against the potions teacher, informing him that it was a mistake not to call on her, as well as stating that she should be acknowledged for her intelligence, a fact that still shocked the girl to some degree. That memory smoothly transitioned to the memory of lunch that day, when Naruto had not only gone out of his way to help her collect her notes, he had gone so far as to chase after her just to make sure that she was okay. Each of these memories made the small smile on Hermione's face grow, as she knew that the blonde boy didn't do them for thanks or adulation but simply because he cared about them. All these memories faded as she remembered what had happened the day before. She had been thoroughly engrossed in a book about the history of the Gryffindor family, since in her opinion as a Gryffindor she should know about the family. She had noticed when the blonde boy had began attempting to gain her attention, but the book was so interesting that she simply had to finish the page before she lost her place. Unfortunately, that became harder as the seconds passed as the blonde boy persisted on attempting to get her attention, and it became rather funny as he almost seemed to be dancing around in front of her. This continued for another minute before one of the blonde's flapping arms inadvertently knocked a half-filled cup of water onto her. She barely suppressed her laughter as she remembered the horrified look that had appeared on the whiskered boy's face after that. Hermione wasn't angry with the blonde, even though she had every right to be. She realized that it was an accident, but she hadn't told the blonde that, and considering the fact that the blonde had spent the better part of today avoiding her, she figured that he thought that she was angry with him. So with that in mind, Hermione decided to wait just a little longer to see if the blonde boy showed up so that she could inform him that she wasn't angry with him. Naruto groaned as he stepped through the entry tunnel. First, he had gotten the crud beat out of him by his clones. Admittedly, fighting 12 of him at once was a little stupid, but he figured that it would help him get stronger faster. All it actually did was leave him really sore. And then after making the long walk back up the grand staircase, he was greeted with the fat woman being really rude to him about the fact that he had woke her up. All Naruto wanted now was to change into his pajamas and crawl into his bed, but he was shocked to see Hermione sitting in one of the chairs, a large book lying on the floor next to the chair. Naruto knew that she was probably still angry with him, and to wake her up at 1:30 in the morning just to suggest that she climb into her bed seemed like a foolish move to the blonde. So taking that into consideration, as well as the fact that the fire was slowly dying, the whiskered boy quickly slipped his orange cloak off his shoulders before draping it over the still sleeping girl's shoulders. He spent another minute making sure that it wouldn't slip off her easily. Naruto climbed the stairs, and after quickly changing into his pajamas and almost jamming his sleeping cap onto his cranium, Naruto fell onto his bed with a soft sigh, sleep overtaking him almost instantly. Hermione was woken from her rather uncomfortable sleep to the sound of giggles. At first the bushy-haired girl didn't want to move as she pulled the blanket that was draped over her closer, only for her eyes to shoot open as she remembered that she didn't have a blanket when she fell asleep last night. It only took the rather intelligent girl a second to recognize the orange cloak that was currently draped over her. A warm feeling began to spread through the young girl like wildfire, as the fact that Naruto's cloak was draped over her was just another sign of the fact that even when the blonde thought she was angry at him, he was still willing to look out for her. She was pulled from her thoughts when she overheard one of the other students talking about how they needed to get to breakfast soon, but she couldn't help but to wonder where the blonde boy had disappeared to the night before. Almost as if summoned by her thoughts, Hermione watched as the blonde-haired boy raced down the stairs and out of the portrait door, the pink lady's angry shouts following after. Hermione chuckled softly at the blonde's usual exuberance before she began to make her way out of the commons room and down towards the great hall at a much more subdued pace. Naruto barely heard the fat lady's shouts as he charged for the bathroom, fully intending to get in a quick bath before he went to breakfast. He didn't have to run far as the Gryffindor's bathroom wasn't very far from their common room, and so after quickly stripping himself, Naruto dove into the already filled bathtub. Before the boy realized it, he was softly singing, a habit that had begun when he was younger in the hopes to strive off the horrible silence that usually surrounded his time in the bathroom. He couldn't remember where he had first heard the song, but the lyrics had simply stuck with him. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. The words resonated off the walls. Naruto knew that someone could come in at any time, but he found that even though it would be rather embarrassing for someone to hear him singing, he simply didn't care. And so the blonde spent the next 15 minutes scrubbing all the sweat from the previous night off of himself, occasionally picking the song up at a certain part. You will when you believe. He finished softly as he tied his shoes before making his way out of the bathroom, and heading down the grand staircase towards breakfast, and hopefully a more exciting day than the previous two. What if Hokage Naruto goes to Hogwarts? End here and thanks for watching my video till the end.